Morning, everybody. We continue our Brocade Russia and CIS SAN Club 2020. Yesterday we had more theoretical view on the topic, and today is practical view with key experts of Brocade, a Broadcom company, and Emulex. Before the main presentations, Sergey will tell a few words about where to find information, how to be trained on Brocade using Broadcom resources.
Let me share my screen a little bit. Wait a minute. Let's start. My name is Sergey Tselikov. I am field application engineer working for a region of Russia and CIS. And the main purpose of my quite short presentation to explain how to get access to education of Brocade now and to other Brocade and Broadcom resources. The time is changing. Uh, Previously, all our resources were located on Brocade website. Nowadays, they are moved to Broadcom. And many people complain that it's quite difficult nowadays to find where these resources located. So this slide explain where you can find the majority of our resources. There are, I would say, four main uh, places where you can find these resources. The main source, of course, our main Broadcom site. Uh, at Broadcom site, you can find the uh, the part that is described fiber channel networking, and the majority of documents, user guides, reference manuals, white papers, electronics books, and so on are located at this site. This part of our site is not doesn't require from user to register, so it's free for everyone. And also we have a Broadcom support website where you can find many different useful resources like security advisory notice, end of life notification, end of availability notification, and so on. And this site is also is free for everyone, so you doesn't need to you don't need to register for to access. But the third resource called Broadcom Customer Support Portal require you to be registered to get access to this part of our website. And this resource may be the most demanding for user because it contains our software. So to get our switches upgraded to download for software, to get some NAV management software, and so on, you had to register here. But it's not the only problem because the majority of customers in our region uh, obtain our equipment not directly from Broadcom, but from various OEMs. To get upgrade for software, to get the majority of documents, you shouldn't go to Broadcom customer support portal directly. You should go to it through OEM support site. They vary from per OEM because every OEM partner has uh, their own website. You should go to this OEM site, register here, uh, uh, and after registration, you can request access to Brocade resources, and they transfer you to our Broadcom Brocade Assist portal for this OEM. And here you can get access to Fabric operating system, SANAV, and so on. There is a good document describing all the process. The link to this document is located at the bottom of this slide. I would advise you to download it, and all the required information is located right here. What we did recently, just before to get access even to release notes for our software, you should go to our customer support portal and get access to it. It was not convenient to many customers, so nowadays we offer you so-called digest versions of our release notes. You can get it at our common main Broadcom website, but these digest versions doesn't do not contain all the content of release notes. Uh, but only the defect tables are not exist are removed from the common website from the common version of release notes. So for the majority of users, the content is quite sufficient. uh, and again, just moving to education. uh, uh, if you are working with Brocade products quite a long time, you may know that previously we have a quite a good education program. We have a quite a good certification program. But again, time changes, and nowadays all our education and certification program moved only to online courses. We have no official training centers now. We have now no certification program. And to support our customers, our partners with education, we created not long ago so-called Brocade Education website. This website, the link is located right here, uh, is free to everyone. There is no need to register to access this website. What content you can find there? Uh, Sorry. First of all, the fundamental learning path is located here. The fundamental learning path is a table that explains how usual customers should pass our courses from starting to uh, expert courses to start uh, to pass sorry uh, to be educated in the right way, just from the very basic courses to very special courses targeted to Brocade professionals. Of course, there are many courses were introduced that explain our new Gen 7 hardware and software, and you can see the majority of them on that slide. But besides them, there are many courses that devoted to different topics like analytics, like automation, installation and administration. If you are a frequent user of our equipment, I would recommend you to go through installation administration list of courses, because they are very important for working with our software and hardware. And also, as you know, we have now two main management products. Brocade Network Advisor. This product is quite outdated, but still in great use of our customers. And there are many courses that describe how to work with this software. And also, you can see there are many courses devoted to SAN, our new management software. The next presentation will be devoted to demonstration how, not the next, after that, there will be the great demonstration about SAN. And you can see that there are many courses that describe this software. Also, there are many multi-topic classes. Uh, for example, a Brocade Associate SAN Administrator, Brocade Professional SAN Administrator, that repeated our courses in the way they existed before our training was moved to to our new way, our new online way. But previous site only contains description of our courses, the list of courses. Just to get trained, to get educated, you should go to our customer support portal. You should register here. The registration process is quite simple and straightforward. There is a YouTube video that explain you, sorry, how to how to go through registration process, and after registration you can access customer support portal. As you see, there are many products within that portal, and many tiles that you can access. But if you are interested in Brocade products, you should choose Brocade, and after that you can get to the Brocade part of Broadcom customer support portal. And again, here you can see several piles devoted to different aspects. Of course, here you can see downloads and documentation sessions where you can download software, documentations for our product, and also the different content. You can see the licensing section. If you want to generate licenses for fabric operation systems, for Brocade NetWiser, for SANNAV, you should go there. SAN reports. This is the link to get Sun Health report. If you are using Sun Health, uh, this is the right place where you can get these reports for your SAN infrastructure. And the section that we now explaining is the training session. So it's called training and education. When you push this button, you are you were you will be present the education site of our Brocade support portal, where you can find the courses you need. So the only way there is no list of courses there. You should enter the name of your course, the course of you want, and after that you are presented uh, the name of this course and the option to register for this course. And after registration, you can see one or several different modules, and these modules can be quite different. Some of them looks like a flash video presentation where you could quite an interactive. You can undergo through this course. Sometimes it's just a PDF document which you can download and study, for example, offline. And after completing all required modules, you can undergo the small assessment test. The length of test is usually from 5 to 15 different questions. And if you finish this test, you have an options to download a certificate of completion, and this nowadays is the only substitution of our certification program, just to get certificate of completion for the different Brocade courses. To sum up, at this slide, you can see the different links devoted to Brocade Education. Brocade Education website, we have a group located at LinkedIn named Brocade Education Group. And there are many useful information about our education here. And also we have a great YouTube channel devoted to Brocade education. There are many videos, educating videos right here. And also, we have a couple of local resources devoted to different type of Brocade content. The content of these resources are mainly the same. The first of them are Telegram channel called Brocade Russia SAN, and the second LinkedIn group with the same name. Uh, uh, though these resources are targeted to our region, Brocade, Russia, and CIS, the majority of content, I would say something like 95% of the whole content is in English, so it can be useful to everyone. If you want to join, these resources are open to everyone. Thank you very much. I I'm just uh, uh, stop sharing my screen and just passing my turn to the next speaker.
Thank you, Sergey. So next presenter is Chip Copper, automation demonstration. That is our deepest expert in the area from East Coast of the USA. Chip, welcome. Chip, we do not hear you. You are on mute.
There we go. How's that?
Yeah, good. So, and maybe, yeah.
All right. Hopefully you're all seeing my screen right now. Thank you for joining me and spending a few minutes in automation. Don't worry if you're not a programmer or if you're someone who doesn't write code, don't worry. This is still for you. My hope here is over the next 45 minutes, you'll get a better feeling for exactly what an automation environment looks like for Brocade. So let me start by showing you this disclaimer. I just want to say a couple notes before we go further. The first note is that I'm going to be using some programs that are not from Broadcom. These are programs that I use because when I program, I want to use open source and I want to use whatever tools are available to me. And I'm also kind of cheap. I don't spend a lot of money. So that means the tools that I use, I want to all be free. So the tools I'm going to be showing you are going to be freely available so you can duplicate exactly what I'm doing here today. Now, the other disclaimer that I have, I'm not that good looking of a guy. I mean, the other presenters on here are very handsome, but I'm not that much. So you probably don't want to look at me. And so instead of looking at me, I'm going to offer up this little tree. Now, this little tree, I 3D printed and I put inside of it some electronics. And inside of these electronics, you have the ability to change the color of my tree. And so during my presentation here, if you decide that you would like to see something other than right now, it's a warm white tree, you can send a tweet out to include cheer lights and then give one of the colors that you see listed here. And you, from wherever you are right now, assuming you're not watching a recording, will be able to change the color of my tree. Now, I show you this for a couple different reasons. The first reason is because you'd probably rather look at a tree than look at me. But the second reason for this is because this is an example of how you, without doing any programming, can take advantage of automation. So from no matter, somebody just changed the color of my tree. Thank you. So from wherever you are, you can manage this infrastructure. The third point that I want to make is that for me to program my little tree here, I used standard interfaces. I used the REST interface to access the system that keeps track of what color my tree should be. But I also used what's called JSON, which is a standard data representation, to say what the current color is. So I'm using standard open technologies for this. Those are exactly the same technologies that you use when automating a Brocade SAN. So you do not have to have any kind of special skills. You don't have to know any special knowledge. If you know the very open REST programming interfaces and you know how to use JSON, you're going to be able to program a Brocade SAN. Now, I don't want you to worry if you're a programmer or if you're a SAN person, but you don't know how to manage SANs or you don't know how to program. It's not my goal to convert you from being a SAN expert into being a programmer. Instead of that, what I'd urge you to do is many of you probably have automation projects going on wherever you are. And the SAN experts are being asked to work with the automation people. What I've discovered is that you need both types of expertise. That a lot of times the SAN experts think that they're going to be replaced by the automators, or the automators think that they don't know enough about a SAN to be able to program it. I'd strongly encourage you to work together as a team, because if an automator doesn't understand what a SAN does, then automating it won't go well. And similarly, if you're a SAN expert, but you don't know how to program, you're going to be not able to implement your automation to achieve your business goals. So again, I'd encourage you, work together so that you can achieve these tasks. And working together as a team, you'll have much more success. Here you can see an overview of what our automation looks like. You can see that there's a lot of different interfaces that are represented on this diagram. First of all, on the far right-hand side, you can see that there's a number of partner tools that are listed. These are partners who have told us that they're taking advantage of the REST APIs that are built into the Fabric operating system and into our management platform to enhance their management tools. We're not going to be speaking about these today. I'm going to leave this up to these different partners to present to you. But sometimes you may hear a partner say, in order for you to use my management tool, you have to be at version 8.2.0 or greater of the Fabric operating system. If they tell you that, that probably means they're taking advantage of our REST API. Now, on the far left-hand side, you can see Ansible. We're not going to be talking about Ansible either, but I did want to let you know that if you write Ansible playbooks, Ansible is another open source management tool. If you use that, then we do have two different libraries that are available to help you write your Ansible playbooks. But today we're going to be concentrating on that piece that lives in the middle, which is the piece where you are writing tools or you are writing automation that is going to be going directly to the Brocade switches. So let me start by telling you how we've automated Brocade fabrics. We didn't want to add a bunch of services to the Fabric operating system that would in any way slow down the fabric or make the fabric harder to use. And so the way that we have added APIs to the Fabric operating system, as you'll see in just a few minutes, is that we have implemented RESTful APIs, and these APIs allow you to do the same thing through REST interfaces that you would otherwise do in a command line. So if you're a SAN administrator, what that means is that you'll be able to take your knowledge and implement it directly as automation through these APIs. You won't have to think about solving a problem a different way. You'll be able to take those routines and those runbooks that you already have, and you'll be able to convert those into automation in a very straightforward manner. You won't have to figure out brand new ways of doing things. Now, the way that you'll access this REST API is going to be going directly from a set of tools that you decide works best for you. So for example, many people have found Python to be a very nice scripting language, either Python 2 or Python 3. You may choose to use shell scripts. You may choose to use other programming languages like C or Go, or other scripting languages like Perl. All of these can take advantage of our REST API, as I'll be showing you here in just a couple seconds. But the important thing is that however you choose to implement it, you should have automations that you understand, automations that are very clear on what they do and how exactly they'll be managing SAN infrastructure. So that's enough slides for right now. let's get into the demonstration and let me walk through some different pieces. Now, let me explain to you what you see on your screen right now. On the left-hand side, you can see that I've got a tool by the name of Postman. Postman is very nice because it allows you to make RESTful calls without writing any programs. And I'll explain what RESTful calls are in just a few seconds. But this is a tool that allows me to test out a programming interface without having to write a lot of code around it. So that means if you wanted to see how a particular call works or how a particular method of doing something is shown on a SAN, like how do I zone, or how do I set up IP tables, or how do I add a user, and you wanted to make sure that you understood how it worked, you would be able to use Postman to do it. And as I mentioned earlier, Postman is free for development. On the right-hand side, you can see I have a plain old terminal. And the reason I have this terminal up is because I'm going to be showing you what something looks like if I were to do it from the command line. And then I'm going to be doing exactly the same thing on the left-hand side. So I'm going to be going through my demonstration here 2 different times. The first time I go through it, I'd like for you to watch the right-hand side of the screen primarily, because on the right-hand side, I'm going to be showing you the commands that you're probably the most familiar with. On the left-hand side, I'm going to be showing you what those same calls look like if I'm using the application programming interface, the API. And I think what you're going to see is that automating a Brocade SAN is just taking the things that you would type into a command line and implementing them in some sort of script. So over here on the right-hand side, of course, the first thing I need to do if I'm going to log in or if I'm going to do anything on a SAN is I need to log in. And so here on the right-hand side, you'll see that I've logged in. In the same way, the first thing that I'll do in an automation is I'll log in. Now, as an admin, you may be asking yourself, how do I know if an automation script is currently logged into my SAN? How do I know if there's some application currently managing? If you execute the command, and by the way, I'm a terrible typist, so I'm going to apologize for that. And I'm really grateful for command completion, so I don't have to type everything in. But if I type in app login history show, this is going to show me all of the applications that have logged into my Fabric so far, but it's also going to show me if any current applications are logged in. And I can see right now that I don't have any other applications that are logged into this Fabric. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute a call that causes this application to log in. Don't worry, we'll be explaining what all these different things are in just a few minutes. All I care about right now is just to log in to the Fabric. So let me log in, and you notice that it came back with a status code here of OK, 200, the same code that you would get if you were to execute this call with a browser. And so now if I look on the right-hand side and I want to see who all was logged in, you'll see that there is now an instance of Postman that has logged in, and I've got a session that's open. So on the right-hand side, I log in using my terminal. On the left-hand side, my application logs in by making a login call. Well, now that I'm logged into my Fabric, let me see what my current configurations are. The way that you would typically do this from the command line is by using the config show command. And if I type config show, you'll see here a list of the currently effective configuration. And you'll also see all of the defined configurations. So I'm now going to do the same thing in my application using the REST APIs. And the way that I'll do that is by using a get command. And this time I'll tell the Fabric to give me the effective configuration. And if I send that off, here is my effective configuration. And if you go through and compare to this effective configuration, you'll see that they're all identically the same. And again, we'll come back to this detail as to what this represents in just a few minutes. If I want to see the defined configurations, I'll execute a different call. and I send that off. And here now are my defined configurations. So now let me get a little bit more information, not about all my configurations, but suppose there was one configuration that I cared about. And let's say that the name of this configuration was test 1. If I say config show test 1, that will show me exactly that the configuration called test 1 consists of a single zone set by the name of simple 3, one zone definition here. I have the same ability inside of an application to go off. And now if I look at that one zone set, you'll see that it consists of a single item, and that item is simple 3. So once again, what I'm doing in my application is exactly the same that I'm doing at my command line. If I wanted to add something to this configuration, I would use the config add command. Similarly over here, if I want to add a zone to this configuration, I can execute a call. And now if I go back and do my config show again, you'll see that that zone that I just added here is, this zone is now a member of this configuration. So test 1 has had simple 2 added to it. So I hope you're getting the idea here that what automation looks like in our SAN fabrics is that you take the same series of steps that you would execute if you were to command line, and you automate those, which means your job as a SAN administrator is to make sure that what you want to automate is very carefully documented and very carefully described. I've seen a lot of automations fail because what happens is that the SAN administrator just knows how to do something, but it's never been written down, or it's never been put on paper so that the automator knows what to write. If you do not understand it, you should not automate it. And I cannot emphasize that strongly enough, that when people have gotten in trouble with automation, it's not because the automation wasn't doing its job. It's because the automation didn't know what to do. Now, in this case, we've told the automation that what we want to do is we want to add a zone to this configuration, and that's exactly what happened. Now, I want you to think about what we were just talking about, and I want you to think, if I was sitting at a terminal and I just typed in the config add command, and I were to log out right now, what would happen? Well, if you're a SAN admin, what you probably know is, well, since I didn't do a config save, everything that I just did should go away. Because if you do many zone changes or alias changes or configuration changes, and you didn't save them and you didn't commit them back to Flash, then everything you've done in that session will be erased. So one question that SAN administrators ask is, what happens if I'm in the middle of an automation and something goes wrong, and the program bombs off, or the program fails or crashes, or I lose internet connectivity? What state is my SAN fabric left in? So let's try that. What I'm going to do now is, remember that I made this change to my zone set, but I did not yet commit it to Flash. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to log out without saving it. I've successfully logged out here, and let's see what happened to my configuration for test 1. This is good news. It's rolled back to the state that it was before. So what that means is exactly the same as if you were typed into a command line. If you log off of an application before you complete things, then that means that anything that that application did as far as zoning changes go will all be rolled back as well. That should make you feel good about zoning through the API, because typically what an application will do is it will change your zones, it will create the aliases, it will delete the necessary aliases, it'll create zones and delete zones and configurations. And once it's gone through and made all of its changes, then the application will go through a second time and verify that everything looks exactly as it is supposed to. And finally, after that, you can commit the changes. So that means the application has many chances to make sure things are right before things are committed to Flash. Well, that was my first time in going through the application. Now I want to go through the application again, but this time I want to concentrate on what's going on the left-hand side of the screen. You'll notice at the very beginning, I logged in to the Fabric. Now, the way that I logged into the Fabric is by using this URL up here. And you should recognize this as being the same type of URL that you would plug into a browser. So for example, if you wanted to go to Broadcom, you'd type in http://www.broadcom.com, and you would execute that. And it would actually, instead of being post here, a browser generally has a get command there. When you execute that command, it'll go out to the website, it'll pull everything down according to a particular format, and it'll present to you the results. In this case, when we log in, I go to the switch. In this case, this is the IP address of my switch. This /rest here says, I want you to use the REST programming interface. And then inside of the REST programming interface, I want you to use the login command. Now, included with that login command, you notice here I'm using authentication information to validate this is who I really am. So I'm using the login name of admin, and then here I'm including my password. When I send this off, I log into the network and it gives me back an OK. Ordinarily, we don't see these status codes coming back from a browser, but if you have ever seen a page when you're going to a website that is no longer available, you get this massive 404 that comes up on the screen. That 404 that you're seeing is exactly the same status code. In this case, we're coming back with 200, which says everything operated okay. But if you didn't come back with a status code of 200, if there was some other status code like the switch is busy or you used the wrong username or password, the status code would be used to indicate that. And that's how a programmer or a script would understand it. And so this status code turns out to be very important. But another thing that came back as a result of looking at this was a value in a header that identified what authorization I'm allowed to use to get into this switch. And so when I set up over here through my app login history, you'll notice that there's this long identifier. Well, there's an identifier like this that's sent back to my browser, and this is what tells me what session I'm using. So that means that just as you have a login session to the terminal, this application now has a login identifier for using for the rest of my calls to identify who it is. The next thing I'm going to do down here is I'm going to get my effective configuration. And when I go off, you notice that I'm using a different URL here, and this time it returned my information. So you may be wondering to yourself, where on earth did Chip get this long URL? Where did all this information come from? To get that information, as Sergey discussed earlier, this information is available on the Broadcom website. So for example, if you go out to www.broadcom.com, and this does not require any login, and you search for Brocade REST API, you'll be presented with a number of documents that will describe for you exactly what I'm showing you now. It will go through and it'll give you all those different operations. And this is the manual that we're interested in. This manual, called the Brocade Fabric REST API Reference Manual for version 8.2.x. And if you get one of our Gen 7 switches, which I'm sure you've been hearing about, you'll be going to version 9 of the Fabric operating system. Both of these manuals are available, and you can download both of these. When you've downloaded both of these, you get a document that looks like this. This document is going to be valuable for going through and helping us figure out which URLs we need, how we log into a Fabric, how we log out of a Fabric, and how we keep track of the different elements and how we know what they are. So that explains to me how I get this URI over here. But in general, if I wanted to get zoning information, where would that come from? Well, let me go to this section of the manual. and I'm sorry for scrolling. I know that sometimes that's tough on the eyes. I'll click on Brocade Zone, and underneath of Brocade Zone, which is the module that deals with zoning, you can see a tree-like structure. This tree-like structure describes what the data coming back looks like. So for example, here we can see this is my effective configuration. And so inside of effective configuration, I can expect to see, let's see, I can see a default zone access identifier, and here it is. I can see a config action, and here's my config action. I can see this DB max, and here I can see a number coming back. So this module tree is going to be used to describe for me what the data coming back looks like. But that still doesn't tell me what the data is. So let's look a little bit deeper. In this case, the first thing that I'm coming across will be a description of what the URI, that is the resource identifier, looks like to allow me to change and retrieve this information. And I can see here that there are two different calls that I can make. One allows me to get the defined configuration, and the other allows me to get the effective configuration. And so in this case, I can see that if I look at my URL, I performed the get operation, which is I told the switch I want to get information from you. Here we can see what is referred to as the base URI. The base URI is just going to be HTTP, and yes, this can be HTTPS for secure communications, the IP address of the switch, and then REST, meaning I'm going to be using the REST API. And then underneath of that, running Brocade Zone, effective configuration, and sure enough, REST, running Brocade Zone, effective configuration. So the way that I figured this out is just by going in and pulling this information directly from the manual. Underneath of that, for each of the different elements that are described in the structure down here, for example, I talked about this thing called DB max. Now I have this number out here. What on earth is that number? Well, let me scroll down a little bit inside of my descriptions. And when I do, I see here a good description of what DB max is. DB max is the maximum size of the zone database in bytes. So between DB max and the available next to it, which is DB available, this is going to tell me how much space I have available for zoning and how much of that has not been used yet. So now I can see that I've got a lot of space for defining my zoning. And here I have plenty of room left to define additional zones, And that goes through for all the other elements out here. So that means now it becomes very easy for me to say, for example, here I can see a checksum. That checksum is very important for me to write data back to my zoning database. It makes sure that nothing has changed since I read this information. Here's the name of a configuration that's currently in effect. Here's a zone inside of that configuration. Zone entry, if I wanted to know about zone entry, I could just come over here and look that up. And then finally down here, I have the entry name. So now I can see exactly what elements should be represented. I know how to get that information. I know what all the operations are that are available, because if I come back up here at the very top and scroll through my index again, and again, I apologize for zooming all over the place in such a short amount of time. Here we can see all of the different features of the Brocade Fabric operating system that have been exposed through the API. So now, as a SAN administrator, you have everything you need to be able to answer the question, can I automate this process? So if you've decided that you want to automate the process of setting up IP filters, you could search this document, and down here you'll see there's a section on Brocade security. Underneath of Brocade security, you'll see I have the ability to modify and retrieve information on all of these different factors. If you wanted to pull port information, you can go to the appropriate place in the manual and it'll show you exactly how you can pull that information. Now, the last piece that I would like to show you here is this representation. For example, down here, you can see that as information is coming back, I have this kind of strange format here. Let me see if I can move that up just a little bit. This format is called JSON, J-S-O-N. JSON has a terrible name. It means JavaScript Object Notation. But the problem is it has nothing to do with Java and it has nothing to do with JavaScript. It's simply a notation that's used for transferring data from a source to a destination using a particular structure. In this case, it's using the structure that has been defined in these module trees. And so the way that JSON comes back is that we have a key and a value. In this case, I can see the first key that comes back is called response. And the value of response is going to be this structure, all of the structure inside of it. Well, inside of that structure, I have another key and a value, and that's going to be the effective configuration. And in this case, effective configuration is another key, and the value is all this information. So you can see here, we can get nested containers to allow me to have many levels of information. Finally, I get down to a key called default zone access, and this key has the value of 0, which I can look at. Now, the nice part about the REST API and about this JSON format that you see here is that these are both industry standard representations. Remember when I showed you my little illuminated tree earlier, I mentioned the fact that we were using standard calls and standard representations. The way that my little tree is getting information about what color it should be is it's making a call that looks just like this out onto a database that happens to live on the internet. And the way that it's getting that information back is by executing a get call, and it gets back information in this format. So once again, the formats and the transactions that we're using for pulling this information on a fabric are exactly the same as you would expect to see if you're using any other API. So if you are an application programmer, you don't have to learn anything special to be able to pull information or push information from our SAN fabrics. So I'm going to go out and refresh my SAN information again. This time, let me go out and look to see how I added a zone. You'll notice that the operation has changed. It's now a post operation. Generally, when we're doing operations against things like databases or data models, we can think of a model called CRUD, which is C-R-U-D. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. So that means the operations that I'm using are either going to be creating something on the SAN fabric, deleting something on the SAN fabric, reading something from the SAN fabric, or updating something on the SAN fabric. In this case, what we're telling the switch through this URI is that I now want you to post something to this particular location. Now, posting you can think of as being something like I'm going to, here we have the expression, you post information to a ledger. So what that means is that suppose that I'm a banker and somebody comes in and gives me $100. If I want the bank to keep track of that $100, then I add a brand new entry into my books, and that's called posting a ledger. And in this case, the post operation means, excuse me, I want you to go out and I want you to add this element to this particular zone name in this member zone. So that's what this operation means. And so when I execute this, it comes back with a standard status code of 201. And now if I do a config show, I can see that it's been added. So how do I commit this? You remember that when I did the effective configuration command, I received this checksum. And I mentioned earlier that the zoning operation is very careful to make sure that nothing is changed. If I now want to go back and I want to save this configuration, the way that I save the configuration is I call this URI that's defined in this document, but now I'm going to include the checksum that was included as part of my get effective configuration call earlier. And the reason I'm doing that is this is how the application makes absolutely certain that nothing has changed from the time that I retrieved that information until I write that information back. So what that says is that suppose that my automation pulled the zoning information and is making some changes, but in the meantime, another administrator has gotten on a console and they've made some additional zoning changes. If that's happened, then as I try to write this checksum back, I'll get an error. Now, in my case, I was able to write it back because nothing changed. No one was on my switch from the time that I pulled the information until I wrote it. And so now that means if I show the configuration, you'll see that it's written back. But now if I log out and my logout was successful, you'll now see that my changes stayed over my logout. They lasted longer than my session because I did save this session. So what have we just seen? What I've done is I've gone all the way from logging in to pulling information about the zones, to modifying the information about the zones, writing that information back, and logging out. And you'll notice, and this is an important part, I've done absolutely no programming. I have not written a single line of code. That means that many administrators use a tool like Postman for managing their infrastructure using the API rather than using something like the command line or a graphical user interface. So you may say to yourself, wow, that's nice, but I don't want to use a tool like Postman. I very much prefer to have the command line. Well, here's the good news. It turns out that the APIs that I just showed you are applicable or can be used by things other than Postman. I can use these APIs directly from my command line. So that's a big idea. The idea is that you don't have to be a programmer to take advantage of the REST APIs. Let me give you an example of that. If you're a system administrator, you may be familiar with the curl command. And I'm going to show you a curl command here. Let me expand this out a little bit so you can see exactly what I have here. In this curl command, which is included as part of every Linux distribution, you can get it on Windows. I think it's even on my phone. Curl will allow you to go out and pull in a URL from a particular location. And so, for example, if I go out and say, let me see, let me just curl https://www.broadcom.com. If I execute this, what just happened is the curl command went out and pulled a bunch of stuff from the Broadcom website. Well, it turns out that in the same way that it pulled stuff from the Brocade website, if you have the right security, you can pull information from a fabric. So let me look at my curl command here. In this case, I'm executing curl. I'm giving the username of admin and password. The header information that I'm including here is telling my SAN fabric, when you return this information to me, I want you to return it in JSON format. If I didn't have this in here, it would return it in XML. But for reasons I'll show you in just a few seconds, I want it to come back in JSON, which is that JavaScript object notation format. This -S here means I want you to be silent. I don't want you to show me a progress bar because I don't need to see that. And then finally out here, I have a URI for the Brocade Media RDP. In this case, I wanted to find out information about my SFPs, about my optic transceivers. And I wanted to make sure that my optic transceivers were running correctly. So what this command says is go out to the fabric, log me in, pull in information about my SFPs, about my optics, and display that to me. So let's execute that command. And if you're not familiar with this, this just tells my shell, pull that information from this command shell and look at the information that's coming back. Here I can see my response. I'm seeing who made my optics. I'm seeing the serial number. Here's the temperature. Here's the power, the transmit power, the current, the voltage. And I'm going to see this information coming back for every SFP that's currently installed on this switch. And again, most importantly, I did no programming. I did not have to write a single line of code. Now, the last thing I'd like to show you here is that I went out and pulled that information in, but remember earlier I talked about the fact that it's coming back is JSON, J-S-O-N. That's really important because there are other tools that are available that will allow me to take the output of that command and format it and process it and just pull information out that I want. So for example, if all I want is information about the name of the port and the temperature of the SFP running on that port, I can do that within the command line. I don't have to write any programs for that. Well, let me show you what that looks like. In this case, you'll notice this is my curl command. So that looks exactly the same, but now what I'm doing is I'm pumping it into a standard utility called JQ. JQ is the command line JSON processor, and this is available on every open system. And so just as I can download curl, I can download JQ and I can run it on my Windows platform or on my Linux platform, and I can pull information out just as you see here. So what I've told JQ to do is I want you to go out through curl. I pull this information in from this URL. Then I want you to pull out the response key value and then the media RDP value. And then for each SFP that I'm pulling off, I want you to give me the name. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger, and the temperature. And that's why you saw what you saw. Now, if this command looks a little scary, don't worry. It turns out that JQ is available. There are YouTube videos telling how to use it. It's a standard tool. So I was able to pull all that information in. Here's a very quick reference. If you're watching this on video, you'll be able to stop this and see where I pulled in information. The only thing that I really didn't talk about here are the Yang files. And I didn't talk about that because we're kind of limited on time. The only thing you need to know about the Yang files is that this is where we describe for every version of the Fabric operating system what is available through the APIs, so that now the manual, if the manual is a little bit out of date, you can always go out to GitHub, and on GitHub, you'll be able to find all the Yang models for all the versions of the Fabric operating system that are currently available. I also have a document that's out here that you can download. And in this, we go over some of the initial aspects of how you go out, how you automate your SAN fabric, and how you get started with all this. So if all this automation still seems a little strange, this is a good reference that you can use for getting a little bit more information. So in the last few minutes, we've seen how we can log into the fabric, how we can make zoning changes. And hopefully what I hope you've seen is that it's very understandable. Download the document that I referenced earlier. In fact, let me come back to that page again so that you can get one last look at where you download this information. In fact, let me pull up this URL just so you have it as we finish up here. Pull down these documents, go through it, and I wish you the best of luck. And I would also like to thank all of you who during this presentation went out and changed the color of my little 3D printed tree. It was wonderful watching the color changes during the presentation. And it was great having the opportunity to speak with you here today. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over. Nikolai, do you have any closing comments?
Thank you, Chip. So I believe we are done with your presentation, and we will have Q&A session later. So I expect many questions for your part. and then Marcos. So FC NVMe update and demonstration.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can see you.
Very good. Yeah, so it's still a little bit early here in California. And you can see I'm wearing my helmet. This is the helmet I wear when I bike to work. It comes in very handy, as you saw the other day, because Martin always walks around with his hammer. So it's always good to have a helmet close to you. But for now, I will take it off. And let's get into NVMe. So let me share my screen here. Please confirm you can see it pretty well.
I can see it well, thank you.
Very good. So again, as with the other presentations, I obviously also have a disclaimer form here. Most of the things that I'm going to show you today are all, things that are G8 and everything, but obviously towards the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we see the future look for NVMe. But I'm going to start with really the market dynamics, the business value of NVMe over fabrics, and then, we're going to look at what does it take to run NVMe. What are the performance enhancements that we see with NVMe today? I'm going to run through a demo and then a little bit of a future look. So you saw this slide, I think, in Martin's presentation. And, really what I want to emphasize here is what we're seeing happening from a technology perspective, both on the server side as well as on the storage side. Martin mentioned that PCIe 4 is available today from both Intel and AMD, but to some degree, Intel was stalling a little bit with getting PCIe 4 released, and it really looks like we're going to see PCIe Gen 5 coming out very, very soon. I'll talk a little bit about that on my last slide as well, when we look at the future look. But really what we're seeing is that we're getting much higher performing servers, higher density, and as AJ Casamento also talked about yesterday, on the array side, much, much higher both capacity and I/O capabilities in a 2 RU footprint, and therefore much higher density. And so when we look at the SAN, what does that really mean from a SAN perspective? I'll talk a little bit about that, but more importantly, what do we see happening with NVMe enabling all that performance that we have, both on the server side as well as on the storage side. And what's really driving this? Well, I'm sure in many of the organizations that you work for, things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, or should we just say the next generation of business intelligence, is something that is really top of mind in most organizations. And the fact is that with our storage no longer having a mechanical component, but being purely silicon, we are seeing that the media basically has a development cycle that is very close to what we've seen with Moore's Law, something that AJ also mentioned yesterday. And so we're seeing this innovation cycle for the media being close to 18 months. And every time you see that next generation of media, not only the capacity goes up, but also the I/O capability. So how many IOPS it can support within you know, a time slot. And obviously, you know, what do we see happening from a product in market perspective in order to capitalize on this and having you know, all this new performance available to us, and what does it enable? Well, this is where, if we look back on all the initiatives to do some kind of more intelligent business intelligence, get more information out of the data in your organization. You know, there are many organizations that run, for example, in-memory databases, which is extremely expensive to do, but it's also a little bit complicated from a data staging perspective, and it's hard to do any kind of data sharing with in-memory databases. Whereas when you use a shared storage array running with NVMe, you can get very close to the same performance levels as you can with in-memory databases. And obviously with the next generation, with persistent memory, you're getting practically at the same level. But that's obviously a little bit more of a future statement. And so why is it that we have, you know, a performance improvement with NVMe? Well, first off, it is because NVMe is designed for storage media that looks like memory instead of a physical drive. And so you can see here on the slide, you know, the stack for NVMe is much, much leaner, and therefore has a faster, you could call it, path through the IO layer in your server. And whereas with SCSI, you know, we use SCSI for all kinds of things, right? Controlling printers, controlling tape robots, and all kinds of stuff. And therefore the SCSI protocol is really, it's a very good utility protocol, but it just is not very fast. And there hasn't really been done much optimization to the SCSI protocol to try to get it more lean. And the next step in what we see that NVMe can take advantage of is obviously the defined standard around multi-queue. So AJ mentioned it yesterday. The standards describe that you can use 64K queues with up to 64K commands for each queue. And so the example that he mentioned was, think about if your hypervisor can then, for each virtual CPU, basically dedicate a dedicated IO queue for each of those, how much parallelism you could get out of your hypervisor. Obviously, this could also apply to any kind of analytics application or other applications where parallel multi-threading is an advantage. So now if we look at what some of the predictions are from the analyst that looks at the market, I think AJ mentioned this yesterday as well, that the expectation is that in this coming year, more than 50% of all external storage arrays will have NVMe, either NVMe attached media on the back end, or be fully NVMe capable on both the back end and the front end. The other thing is that if you look at NVMe over fiber channel, there, the ecosystem is really ready to support NVMe and has been for quite a while. All Gen 6 HBAs available, and targets have been available since 2018. The HBAs have been available before 2018, and switches shipping since 2011. So as long as your switch is running FOSS 8.1 or later, then it supports FCNVMe. So that means that very often the gear that's already deployed in the enterprise data center is available to run NVMe. And it's really just a matter of getting to the right driver code level, OS code level on the array, and then you're basically ready to go. The advantage of that is, of course, that you don't have to rip and replace the infrastructure in your data center in order to adopt NVMe. But I think even more importantly is that there is support to run SCSI and NVMe at the same time on the same port. And when we get to the demo, I will really show, what I will show you is an example with VMware ESXi 7, where we're going to migrate to a storage migration of a virtual machine while we are running a workload from a SCSI-backed LUN to an NVMe namespace. And everything is running on the same physical ports on the server, on the array, and basically just the workload moves from running SCSI to NVMe without any downtime, and you will see the performance improvement doing that. Now, there's, you know, ever since the NVMe over Fabrics standard came out, there's a lot of discussion about, okay, so what is the right fabric to run NVMe on? There's a lot of attention, especially from the hyperscalers, such as, you know, Facebook were driving a lot of innovation and developed around NVMe over Fabrics very early on, as well as some of the other hyperscalers. And obviously their application platform, the hyperscaler platform, is running on Ethernet. And so there was a very strong initial push there to run NVMe over Ethernet. What they learned very early on was that the lack of fabric services on Ethernet that really is the foundation for reliable and high performing, and I would say very little operational touch for storage traffic, they're not available on Ethernet. And as a matter of fact, the NVMe NVMe Express org are, you know, today discussing how to implement these fabric services on Ethernet. So they're basically discussing the standards definitions for how do you do, for example, centralized discovery in your network. One of the proposals is to use multicast DNS. So, you know, the host can discover where to find the targets, so you don't have to go and manually configure it on every machine, because that is really the challenge today with running NVMe over Ethernet, is that you have to touch every single machine and do a lot of configuration every time there is a small change. And that's also why we don't really see any adoption on NVMe over Ethernet. That it is just not, it's really not mature already yet. And you can probably imagine that if they're just discussing these standards right now, it will be years before they're available, you know, off the shelf for the enterprise. And once you see that, then of course there's going to be this whole discussion of, well, how does it really compare with running NVMe over fiber channel? And that's where what I want to illustrate with this slide here is the difference in the stack when you're running NVMe or SCSI on Ethernet or on fiber channel. So what you see on the left column here is when you're running over fiber channel. You can see that both NVMe and fiber channel, and FCP, which is basically SCSI, maps directly to the fiber channel layer, and the fiber channel layer guarantees lossless transport, flow control, all those nice things that you know and love about fiber channel. Whereas if you look on the Ethernet side, if we start with you know, SCSI, there you have basically iSCSI is the pendant there. It depends on TCP/IP for flow control, and then it runs on a lossy network. And I don't know if you've run iSCSI environments at a larger scale. The challenge there is it's very labor intensive to manage a large iSCSI environment. Secondly, it's very hard to get the full performance out of the arrays that you can buy from all the storage vendors when you use iSCSI. They will say things like, well, if you want to set up for performance, you have to make sure your initiator has access to all the target ports on the array. Or they will say things like, well, if you run iSCSI, you can get, you know, X amount of IOPS out of a single port. But if you run Fiber Channel, then you can get up to 4x the amount of IOPS out of the same port. And so really what we've seen in the market for quite some time over the years is that iSCSI works really well in small implementations, but for anything where you want both scale and performance, iSCSI is not really a valid option. And I think we're going to see something very similar with NVMe over TCP/IP. So remember here, the standards are not really defined yet for any kind of fabric services on Ethernet. So if you want to implement NVMe over TCP, you basically have to handhold everything. Obviously the latency that you get is not comparable. Some of you may think, well, what happened to NVMe over RDMA or NVMe over RoCE v2? In all honesty, we are not really seeing any kind of adoption of NVMe over RoCE v2. There was a lot of talk about it very early on, especially driven by one vendor. But the reality is that the, I would say, deployment and management challenges with running a lossless Ethernet network based on DCB, data center bridging protocol, is not trivial at all. And we don't really see an adoption there in the enterprise. And as well as from the Ethernet vendors, we don't really see that they necessarily, develop much within the DCB protocol from a ease of deployment or even having it available across all the platforms in their network portfolio. And that's why, if you, for example, if you're aware of, there's something called Flash Memory Summit every year in Santa Clara. It's usually in August, but this year it was as late as last month, where the industry really comes together, and NVMe is always, the #1 topic these days. And, the last couple of years, you can see that the interest around RoCE or RDMA is really going away, and everybody has this expectation around NVMe over TCP, in particular driven by the hyperscalers, or you could say storage deployments without the classical storage array architecture. But again, it's kind of really early. The NVMe Express organization talked about, how they're discussing these new standards for fabric services on Ethernet. But again, it is something that is not here today. And that's the other thing I want to say with this slide is that while today you can run NVMe and SCSI in parallel on your fiber channel network, my expectation is that in the future, people will stop using SCSI for new deployments. Of course, SCSI is not going to go away for your existing deployments. At some point, we're going to see NVMe over TCP, probably in the same fashion as we've seen iSCSI apply in the enterprise. Something that's was the slowest component in this transition to NVMe support within the fiber channel ecosystem has really been the operating systems. But as of today, well, actually as of much earlier this year, there's really industry support for NVMe over fiber channel, including multipathing capabilities or multipathing support as you know it with SCSI across all the major operating systems that we see in the data center, in the enterprise data center. And Obviously, the support from VMware with ESXi 7.0 that came out in April was really the one many waited for. And Martin talked a little bit about this yesterday, how we see the deployment of Hyper-V versus ESX across the different regions. In North America, by far, VMware is the #1 hypervisor, probably followed by KVM. And then there's very little Hyper-V. I know it's a little bit different in Europe as well as Eastern Europe. There is support for NVMe on Hyper-V, but what you will see there is that the NVMe protocol sort of maps into the store port driver on the Windows server. So you can't expect to see the same performance improvements as you can see on the Linux-based platforms, especially as we go forward. There are no committed plans from Microsoft to change that, but obviously time will show. So what can you really expect from a performance perspective when you start using NVMe? Well, what I'm showing you here are really test results that I have summarized from different performance tests that have been published over the last 24 months from different vendors. Many of these tests have been done together with our good brothers in Broadcom, Emulex, that have worked with, you know, NetApp, IBM, and other storage vendors, and basically done these performance tests primarily with transactional databases, and then proven that you can expect around, you know, 30% more transactions per minute, around 30% lower latency, and somewhere in the range around 30% lower CPU consumption when you move from SCSI to NVMe on exactly the same hardware, just simply using the NVMe protocol instead of SCSI. Obviously, these numbers differ a little bit because there's variation across what servers are used for these performance demonstrations or performance tests, as well as the array performance across the different vendors. But this is really what you should expect to see if you just move today with the gear you have on your floor, or let's say you brought in a new array that supported NVMe. Now, I wanted to show you this slide here before we go to the demo. So if we look at where does this performance improvement come from? Well, if we look at the stack on the left here on the server and on the right here on the storage controller on the array. So the reason why you see a performance improvement today is because the stack here on the server is more lean on NVMe compared to SCSI. So therefore, transactions happen basically, they have, how do you say, a shorter path through the IO layer on the server. And also the same thing applies on the controller side. Then within the controller, storage media can be attached either with SCSI or with NVMe. Obviously, if you're running NVMe attached storage, then there's the opportunity to get to the lowest latency numbers within the storage controller. But really what we see with the storage controller is that this layer here around the storage services is often the slowest part in the storage controllers. And this is an area where my expectation is that over the next, 3 to 5 years, that we're going to see storage controllers come out with a different architecture. Because if you look back a little bit, before we had NVMe, the storage controller, what it was doing was it was aggregating, or even you could say before we had all flash, the storage controller was aggregating storage media, and by doing so, achieving higher performance than a single media could deliver. And also lower latency by applying, cache capabilities on the front end, and read-ahead algorithms on the back end, as well as striping the reads across multiple medias in a rank or an array. Now, because, and you could say the software on the storage controller usually had a latency somewhere in the range of 500 microseconds. But now what's happening is that you're getting media that each media itself can deliver with latency, sub 100 microseconds. And obviously, when that happens, then the overhead, you could call it, of the storage services, or the added latency of the storage services, is remarkable now in order to get to that lower latency and higher performance. And this is really an area where I think we're going to see a lot of improvements over the next years. If you look at the network, or the fiber channel network, really there's no difference to us whether we transport NVMe or SCSI. It takes the same time to go through our ASICs. The data is transported, same frame size as everything. So there's no difference really there. But it does obviously have an importance when it comes to how we see the frames on the network. And I'll talk a little bit about that after the demo. But let's first jump to the demo here. Okay. So Nikolai or Sergey, if someone can just confirm that you can see my demo screen fine.
I can see it.
Okay, very good. So what I have here is a setup with a ESX 7.0 server, and on that server I've provisioned basically a data store that is backed by a SCSI LUN, and then a new data store that's backed by a namespace ID. And then on that, I run a Windows VM. And at this point in time, it's provisioned on the SCSI LUN, so the data store backed by the SCSI LUN. And then I will run a workload, and then we will migrate that that VM's virtual disk where the workload is running to the data store that's backed by the namespace ID. So let's get started here. So you can see here, my data store here is called FCP 200, and now I'm migrating it over to the NVMe backed SCSI LUN, or sorry, NVMe backed LUN namespace ID. Sorry. So what you see here is that the storage vMotion has started, and we see a little bit of dip in performance as that data is moved over. But then right after that, you actually see that the performance practically doubles on the for the application. And really in this environment here, I didn't do anything else but just take ESXi 7.0 straight out of the box and deploy, set up with the namespace ID on the array, map that to the ESX server, and then move the VM over. Having that said, there are, as I mentioned earlier, different performance tests that are available for you if you search for them. And generally what they show is in the range of a 2x performance improvement simply by moving from using SCSI to NVMe on a VMware machine. What I'm doing here is I'm going into SANNav. Salim is going to tell you a lot more about SANNav later on, but what I'm showing you here in investigation mode is just the performance on the ports when I move between NVMe and SCSI. I have two lines, one for read and one for write. This is a 7030 read-write workload, and you can see I moved the machine back and forth between NVMe and SCSI. This part of the demonstration is just recapping what we saw, that you can make this move without any downtime and completely seamless in order to gain this performance. I do want to show you one more thing here, and that is on the environment. So you can see here my ESX server. In this example here, I have 2 Gen 7 switches, but you know, it is supported on both Gen 5, Gen 6, and Gen 7. And here you have my array. And you know, we use exactly the same ports for both SCSI and NVMe. You will see that some of the array vendors, they use you know, NPIV for the NVMe storage controllers to log in. And obviously in that case, you'll have to do your zoning to those NPV worldwide port names. But apart from that, really everything is exactly the way that you're used to with SCSI. You use zoning to provision access in the fabric, and then you do LUN masking or volume allocation on the array, depending on, you know, what terminology the different array vendors use. Okay, so going back here, so what I showed you here obviously did not take advantage at all of multi-queuing, right? We're still running single queue on the ESX server, but this is really where we see the future go. When we look at NVMe with SCSI, we have the single queue with 64 commands on the queue. With NVMe, we can go multi-queue. And obviously, that's going to increase the performance capabilities. Now, AJ hinted a little bit to this slide yesterday that what we see from a storage network perspective is, as I mentioned before, it really makes no difference to us if we're transporting SCSI or NVMe. But what we see on the networking side is that the gap between the IOs and between the frames are decreasing. We already saw that when we went from you know, spinning media to all flash arrays. So what this slide illustrates is that here we have the gap between the frames, and then within the frames, there are sorry, between the, this is the inter-IO gap, and then between the frames, which are these little blue dots here, there's an inter-frame gap, meaning there's basically idle times on the network. And these were quite large, you know, when we had spinning media, when we got all flash arrays, they decreased. And really what we're seeing with NVMe is that these decrease again an order of magnitude, because the array can deliver the data much faster with NVMe than it could before. Then you see that we get these bursts of IO with much smaller IO gap. And what does that mean? Well, that means that from a network operations perspective, you really need the network to be able to identify if any problems happen, and then ideally autocorrect it completely without any user intervention, in order to make sure that there is no performance degradation or impact when issues happen. And what could these issues be? Well, it could, for example, be you know, some kind of congestion that's happening. It could be root caused by either you know, marginal physical layer issues. It could be because of oversubscribed hosts or targets in your environment, or it could also be you know, momentarily running out of bandwidth on your inter-switch links. And so obviously for the fabric to be able to detect this and then either mitigate directly, obviously always alerting, or giving you the capabilities to handle this in a seamless way is extremely important. And this is really the whole reason for why you know, we built the Gen 7 product portfolio with a very strong focus on the autonomous SAN and bringing these capabilities to, you know, first of all, learn what's happening on the network, optimize for what's happening on the network, and finally heal when issues happen on the network. As I mentioned before, seamless integration is available Gen 5, Gen 6, Gen 7, since FOSS 8.1 supports NVMe. On the server sides, the HBAs, as long as they're Gen 6, they will support NVMe. But obviously you have to run with newer drivers than what they came out with originally. And from a monitoring capability for FC NVMe, that is all available on Gen 7 platforms, as well as the last two products that came out in the Gen 6 family, the G630 and the FC32-64 blade. They both came out after the FC NVMe standards were ratified, and we were able to get that in there in those two products. And then obviously you can run concurrent traffic regardless of what platforms you're running on. But if you want the full performance optimization and enhanced monitoring, you have to be on the latest platforms. If we look at market adoption, Nikolai had a question around this yesterday. What kind of deployments have we seen around customers? This is a slide, it's actually quite old. It's more than a year old, from one of our vendors, which we did a webinar with back in June 2019, that really looked at their first adopters. And so you can see more than a year ago, they had around 40 customers who were, deploying or testing. And this is really the distribution across the different industries that their customer base represented. And so you can see there's very high, part of that, very large part of that is in financial institutions. Obviously, financial institutions are very interested in driving business intelligence out of their data, and often as close to real time as possible. And that's really a very common theme around the early adopters, is to be able to run some business intelligence. You can call it machine learning or artificial intelligence, depending on how sophisticated their algorithms are and how they're architected. But all in all, really what they're trying to do is get intelligence faster and often as close to real time as possible. What I mean by that is, from the application that generates the data foundation that they do their analytics on or business intelligence on, basically be able to do that as close to when that data is generated, as they see that as a competitive advantage or an enabler to provide completely new services that they haven't been able to before. Now, if we look at the future with NVMe, so we have a couple of things happening, right? And I already talked about them in different ways. Well, first of all, the PCIe Gen 4, Gen 5. Well, if you buy new servers today, make sure you at least buy Gen 4, PCIe Gen 4 servers. But I have a strong expectation that we're going to see Gen 5 coming out very soon, probably already in 2022. What do I have to back that up? Well, first of all, earlier this year, one of the vendors in Silicon Valley who makes test gear for example, PCIe buses, and they do a lot of different things. They also make test gear for Fiber Channel. We use them for our testing, and they basically productized a PCIe Gen 5 tester earlier this year. And if you think about it, they're not going to sell, hundred thousands of units. They may sell, in the 10,000s of these units. But the fact that they already have Gen 5 released as a GA product means that there is a lot of development going on across the ecosystem for that. And obviously, as you know, with Gen 5, we're going to get, double the speed in the lanes compared to Gen 4. And so that is going to be a huge performance improvement. On the storage density side, if you followed what, for example, Intel is very open about what they're doing around their solid state media developments, especially in their blogs. It's very interesting to see how not only the density from a capacity perspective is going up for every generation, but also the IO, IOPS per second capabilities. And there is this expectation that, if you just continue to deploy in servers, you will have this what's called dark flash. It's very hard to read on this slide. I just grabbed some slides from different, third parties that talk about what's going on, obviously. But you will see here on this second major bullet, they talk about that there's an expectation that there will be basically large amounts of flash if you deploy the latest SSD drives directly in servers that you can't really utilize because you don't have enough CPU power on your server to basically take advantage of it. And I think that will drive some movement away from direct attached storage in the server and direct attached storage architectures back to shared storage architectures as you have with storage area networks today. And then the last second last little bullet I have here is obviously around parallelism. It's well known that you can drive cost down if you can run in parallel on a scale out model instead of a scale up model where you just need faster and faster cores. And so obviously I think that movement around parallelism to take advantage of NVMe's capabilities there, I think we're going to see applications starting to do that sometime soon. I want to mention VMware one more time, simply because they came out with their first release. You can see some level of improvement. They're still working on, increasing the performance improvements there for NVMe, and I think that is one thing that we will see as well over the next 1 to 2 years. There's more information available to you. If you go and look at the Broadcom site, there's a NVMe over Fiber Channel book that you can go and take a look at. Here in this book, we talk a little bit about, what are the different technologies available to you for NVMe over fabrics, and then of course how they compare, and then what you get with NVMe over Fiber Channel, how you can plan to adopt NVMe over Fiber Channel. I would recommend you to read it very soon, because we're probably going to have a third edition coming out this spring, and it's always good to know what was in the old book. Or you can look at it and then you can decide you want to wait reading it until the new edition comes out, but it probably won't be out until sometime in late spring. I would also recommend you to, in general, go to the Broadcom website. We have a new NVMe specific area on our website that links you to a lot of different content, such as analyst papers, performance reports, demonstrations that are also available to you on the YouTube channel, the Brocade YouTube channel, which I mentioned yesterday. So really a lot of very good content out there. And with that, I think I'm very close to the end of my speaking slot, and we can open up for questions.
Thank you, Marcus. So now we have 30-minute question and answer session or break, whatever you like. So we have some questions already. So the first one, Marcus, is it possible to use NVMe storage not over TCP, IP, or FC? For example, I want to use NVMe over Ethernet.
Yeah, so you can use NVMe over, so when you say Ethernet, you need some kind of transport protocol. I think it sounded in the question as you didn't want to use TCP. So you can use NVMe over Rocky, for example, and technically NVMe over Rocky does not need the network to be DCBX. So if you're using a single switch, then that would probably work reasonably well. But you have to remember that if you run NVMe over RDMA or NVMe over Rocky, that you use UDP instead of TCP. And that means that if the network does not provide any kind of connection control, then you will run into congestion and drop packet issues, and your application will crash. So I don't know if that was the ask there.
Thank you, Marcus. So if there are more questions, the person would specify. So I encourage all of you to ask questions through Q&A or вопросы и ответы. It depends on in what language you have your interface. And maybe questions not only to Marcus, but to Sergey, to Chip Copper. So as Chip had to leave, David will be able to answer Chip's questions also. So if you do not ask questions, we will not answer them. So, so while we are waiting for questions, I will try to share. Oh, one more question came. Can NVMe over FC be used for replication between sites like FCIP?
Yeah, so very good question. So obviously when you run NVMe to your namespace at your local site, the array can replicate that in the background, either using SCSI or NVMe. With the existing vendors, they will obviously use SCSI, as that has something they've developed over many years and is very solid. But we're actually seeing that one of the new storage vendors, Pure, they're going to do replication over FC using NVMe, and they will release that. Yeah, you should ask them when they release, but my understanding is they will release this year. We have been testing with them on our extension platforms, and they basically are able to map that, or we are able to map that on our extension platform, the NVMe traffic over FCIP between the data centers. So yes, but I think you will see from all the traditional vendors that they will probably not change their replication protocol to be NVMe, but just continue to use SCSI, at least in the foreseeable future.
Thank you, Marcus. More questions, please. Marcus, could you please stop sharing your screen?
Of course. I just can't see my cursor anymore. There we go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So while we are waiting for more questions, I will try to share with you the history. So that is the very first Brocade Club, which was conducted in 2009. And it was done by Thomas Mitrowitz, our SE from Austria at that time. That is 2012. You probably recognize the person on the left. He has hair at this time. So that is Martin Skagen. I heard him yesterday. So Marcus, do you see the screen? Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's clear.
Yeah, so you see Marcus and our SE Grigory Nikonov at this time. So we had two sessions at this time, customers and certified engineers. So that is the customer part, and then that are certified engineers. See, quite many people. It was 2012. And then we went to Red Square. So Martin, near Muslim of Lenin, and here with a hat. And that is probably 2014 or 15. That is Blaine Rovsky, who is in charge of software development in our company. So, and beautiful part of it is possibility to offline communicate. And you see two people on the background, Linar and Evgeny Melnichuk. So Linar is in Australia now. Evgeny, I'm not sure where, maybe in the USA, not sure. Svetlana, many years at Brocade, helped organize all these events. Many of you recognize yourself here, I believe. So many people are still at this event today. Another one, so that is not very clear, but it is Anthony Paris. He's in charge of directors in product management and embedded switches of Brocade. Probably 2015. That is Santa Claus and Snegurочка, as we call in Russia, the lady which goes together with Santa Claus. So there are some thoughts who is Snegurочка to Santa Claus. Normally, it is his granddaughter, people believe. Yeah, that is 2016. Professional photographers started to work at our clubs. Just 1 year before Brocade was bought by Broadcom. Smart optics. Anton Chernyshov, he is one of the trainers at Hewlett-Packard Training Center in Moscow. And Yuri Yevorsky in the middle. So he's the trainer for Unix Education Center, one of the best trainers on SAN in EMEA continent. So the person on the right, that is Evgeny Vnutskih, and he's just on this slide on the right side also. So he's from OCS distributor, and he's in charge of smart optics distribution in Russia and CIS region. So if you need smart optics solutions for connection through CVDM, DVDM, or colored optics of the sites, so smart optics is a certified solution for Brocade. Yeah, and we used to have a customer panel during such events where we have Q&A with top customers here. And at that point, I think on the left, that is Moscow Exchange, then mobile telesystems. So I'm not sure Gazprom Bank or Raiffeisen Bank before that, since Maxim Aleshin moved from Raiffeisen to Gazprom Bank at that time, and Tander, that is retail network in Russia, Moscow government. So you see we had quite hot exchange of opinions and experience between customers at such panels. Yulia Stitsuk, so she used to be our marketing manager till the end of 2019. Unfortunately, then we were reduced to 2 people in the region, just sales and systems engineer. So that is for overview of some pictures from the history. So any questions, gentlemen? Or we have a break till 6 p.m. Moscow time, so it means we have 19 minutes to go. Which was in December 2000. Oh, question. Great. No, it's not a question. Everybody went to eat something. Okay. For those who stay, more pictures. Just let me share it again. Yeah. Is it one more? No. Okay, Club 2019, Moscow. Talmer. That was Hitachi. Pure was also sponsoring. So meeting of partners and customers in Russia. That is Hitachi and customers. So hopefully, yeah, that is Dennis Makishima. So he used to be the main speaker at this 2019 event. Dennis is in charge of hardware engineering in Brocade. So Ekaterina Pcholka, she manages our events from agency side. So over the years, a community of SAN experts was formed in the region. People know each other, communicate, exchange experience. Again, so that is end user session when customers share experience, what happened during the year, and what are the questions. Candice from Unix Education Center. So our marketing. Unix Education Center. So on the left, that is Svetlana Korneva, director of this center. If you need to train your people offline or online, remember of Unix Education Center. They can do it well in Russian and in English as well. And then we had some presentations of our partners at this event. So Alexei Volchanov was presenting yesterday. You heard him. So Vera is in charge of smart optics. She's SE. And when one of our customers asked her during the event, what colors you have, she said, we have pink for sure. So I still remember this for years. So Unix Center exists since early 2000. And Svetlana, she drives this business for nearly 20 years already. They're based in St. Petersburg. So if you need to be out of your office, St. Petersburg is a nice location to be trained. And feedback questionnaires with prize draw in the end. and some music. Okay, so that was the photograph part. And we have 2 minutes to go. So the second part will be dedicated to management tools, which we have. One of them is Brocade tool, which is called SAN and Salim will tell us about it. It is a new step in Brocade SAN management. And then we will have a part from Emulex. First, I've asked to tell a bit what is Emulex, what is the structure, what are the people, and then Dale will tell us about the management tool, which permits to manage Emulex cards together and maybe in some cooperation with SAN. So time, Salim, please start.
Thank you, Nikolai. Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay, Salim.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Is this okay?
Yes, I see it.
Can you see presentation mode?
No.
Do I need to swap the display?
So I see it now as presenter see it with current slide and next slide. Yeah, now I see it full screen.
Okay, good. So are you ready to start?
Yes, please.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Salim Galou. I'm the product manager for SAN. I've been with the company for about 5 years with Brocade. I used to be an engineering lead before moving to the product management side about 2 years ago. And so now I am managing SAN as well as BNA, our product, which is on an end-of-life trajectory, and SAN being the replacement for it. So today, I will be talking about SAN. Try to give you an overview of the product. and in an introduction. I'll briefly talk about the architecture to explain to you what's underneath the hood, under the hood. What are the main foundations and components of the architecture that allow us to scale. Then I will give you a brief high-level feature description of both of the products. I'll spend some time bringing you up to speed with what are all the features that are available in SANNAV 2.1, 0. And after that, I will give you a very brief overview of two releases that we have. Our 2.1.1 release, which is going to be GA in about exactly actually 8 days. And 2.2 plans will be just one slide to give you a very high level overview. I can't talk much about 2.2 because it's being developed right now, but 2.1.1 I'll give you an overview because it will be GA in 8 days. So I think the plans are relatively solid at this point. So with that, let me start with introducing the SANNAV and why. Let me start by saying what we are trying to do. So when we had BNA, there were lots of issues with using the system. BNA is a great tool, but we needed to take a different approach. We needed to make sure that operators and customers, our customers, our OEM partners and all that could use the system, make sure that they could take action on information that we provide. In BNA, that's not always the case. We wanted to make sure that we have tools to visualize your SAN. Make sure that when there are issues, that we give you the tools to be able to understand the performance data and take action. So all of these things were not really available in BNA, and we decided to take a step back and decide to figure out what is it that we want to do. Another thing that we wanted to do is make sure that what this slide is trying to say is that we are receiving a lot of information from the SAN, from FOS switches, a lot of it. And in fact, with latest releases of FOS, we're getting even more data actually streamed to us using a new technology that I'll be talking about in a little bit. And our job in this new product is to make sure that we basically process and consume this data and provide it to you in such a way that you can visualize what's really happening in this complex environment on the left. And so our job is to, for example, provide you information about the health of the entities that make up the SAN so that you can easily investigate them and understand their health. Why are they in poor health, or what actions you need to take to bring them back into a healthy state. Our job is also to summarize the critical data into very specific widgets that you are able to consume and make out immediately. And then, if and when problems happen, we need to give you powerful tools in order for you to be able to troubleshoot quickly the issues and identify them. So you may say that BNA does some of it, and to some extent it's true, but BNA was not architected and designed from the ground up with this in mind. SANNAV is, and even though it's in its infancy, we are only at release 2.0, we are already making lots of strides, and we have implemented many features that go towards this goal. And I'll be talking about that soon. So with that, I'm now going to introduce the two products. So we have decided to build two products. The first one is SANNAV Global View. So SANNAV Global View is a tool that is useful for our customers that have many instances of management systems deployed all over the world. So let's say a customer has, SAN managed over, let's say, 10 different geographical places, and they need to have 10 instances of a management portal, which I haven't introduced yet, but this is the same as BNA, if you will. And they need to get information aggregated at a global level. So for example, things like getting a complete inventory of all of your ports across the 10 locations all over the world, or getting information about the health of your fabrics across all the SANs that you have deployed all over the world. To answer those questions, customers need SANNAV Global View. And SANNAV Management Portal, I explained it earlier in a few words, but let me tell you in more details what it is. It's basically an element management system that is capable of managing multiple fabrics. So it is, if you will, a replacement of BNA, but I'd like to put a caveat to this. It's not a replacement one for one. The analogy is, for example, if we take a car business as an analogy, you are the customer, you buy a car in 2000, let's say that this car represents BNA, and it feels and it drives and it has certain characteristics back that as you bought them in 2000. Now, fast forward to 2020, you buy the same model of that car, and it's called, say, SANNAV. And now the architecture, what's under the hood is very different. Both cars do the same thing. They both drive, they take you from point A to point B. But the way that they take you to point A to point B, your experience as you drive or use the system is completely different. And that is a good analogy to keep in mind for what SANNAV Management Portal is. So now that I've introduced these two products, let me give you a high-level overview of the two offerings and how the licensing works. So first of all, both SANNAV Management Portal and SANNAV Global View are sold using a subscription model. So it's a subscription that you can buy for 1 year, 3 year, or 5 year, and it's not like BNA, where the license is perpetual and you have to purchase the support every year. When you purchase the license of SANNAV, you also get not just the software, but you also get the support for the duration that you subscribe to. You can buy a subscription for 1 year, 3 year, or 5 year. Brocade Management Portal has two editions. One is a base edition. The other one is an enterprise edition. The base edition allows you only to manage up to 600 ports. And with that edition, you cannot manage directors. If you need to manage directors, you need to have the enterprise edition, which can scale up to 15,000 ports. And when I say scale, I really mean scale, because BNA, for example, has lots of issues when you reach 9,000, 10,000 ports. With SANNAV, even at 15,000 ports, the performance and the user experience is seamless. That's what it means to scale. And I'll talk about this in a little bit later about the scale. And on SANNAV Global View, we only have one instance of Global View that, in terms of scale, is allowing you to manage up to 20 SANNAV Management Portal instances. So both of these licenses, any of these licenses, any customer is able to, an OEM customer or an end customer not going through an OEM, is able to actually get a fully functional trial of any of the software, the Management Portal or Global View, any edition. And the trial is free of charge for 90 days. After 90 days, if you want to continue with SANNAV, then you have to purchase a subscription. In terms of deployment, you can deploy SANNAV Management Portal or Global View on a VM or bare metal server. And SANNAV is a fully Linux architected type of software. So we don't support Windows, and that was deliberate from day one. We support Red Hat Linux and CentOS. The version depends on which SANNAV version you are, but currently with SANNAV 210A, we can support 8.1, 7.8, and with our next version, 2.1.1, which I'll talk about later, we can support higher versions of RHEL and CentOS. It is also possible to deploy SANNAV Management Portal as an open virtual appliance that you can import in your vCenter, and it's self-contained image that contains everything, including the OS. And in fact, in SANNAV OVA, we do package CentOS 8.1 in our 2.10a release. And one note is that even though the architecture, which I'm about to talk in a couple of slides, supports a multi-node deployment in a cluster, we used to support that up to our version 2.0, but we've stopped supporting it because none of our customers actually deployed it this way, and it doesn't seem to be a real need. Neither is a deployment on the cloud at this point, although we have heard one or two requests here and there, but in general, we are not deploying in the cloud. Having said that, I want to point out that the SANNAV software architecture is fully capable of being deployed in the cloud. It's not free. It will take some development work in order to make it work, but there is no technical limitations for us to actually run in the cloud and provide the cloud offering later on if that becomes a new need in the network management arena. But as of today, it appears that all of our customers want to have their own instance in their data center, and therefore cloud deployment is not a requirement at this point. Again, that may change, and if it does, the architecture supports it. So now that I've talked to you briefly about the licensing, the product offering, and the deployment model, I will now give you a brief introduction of the product. So SANNAV Global View, basically I already alluded to it in the beginning. If you are sitting at, let's say, your console, or where I am right now, I'm at home, I can easily bring up Global View on my computer, on my home laptop, connect to a server that's in our lab in San Jose. And from my home, I can actually manage a SAN environment that is deployed all over the world. And I can have global visibility into all of those SANNAV management portals that are deployed all over the world. It has powerful search. The navigation is seamless. So what I mean by that is that, and it's a very powerful concept, is that you can actually navigate from SANNAV Global View, click on any clickable entity, and if you click on something, it will take you to the SANNAV Management Portal instance seamlessly with one click. It will open a new tab in your browser, and you will be inside the management portal at that point that you came from. So it's an in-context click-through. So from Global View, I can directly go to a management portal. And further, I want to put the plug here for this because it's very important to give you an idea of the power of all of this, is that in SANNAV Management Portal, we have a feature where you can actually launch the web tools. Web tools is the actual element manager that resides inside the switch or the director in FOSS, and it's a web server. So from SANNAV Management Portal, it is possible to launch this web tools. With FOSS 9.0 and above, web tools has been completely rewritten. It's now a fully non-Java, it's fully HTML5 based. And not only that, it is also exactly the same look and feel as SANNAV. So to go back to my use case where I was telling you I was at home, I'm sitting at home, I have Global View, I'm looking at 10 data center. I can go to any of those data centers, look at SANNAV Management Portal, and then I can click on a switch in that data center and have a seamless view of web tools that looks exactly like management portal look and feel. So it's very powerful concept. And for you as a user, you have no idea to which system you are talking to. For you, you are in a web browser and you're just simply opening a new tab, therefore providing you a very seamless experience that is extremely powerful. So in Global View, we can also allow you to monitor things, the health across all of your 10 data centers. You can visualize all the events and all the alarms, all the configuration drifts in one screen. It is also possible for you, for example, to troubleshoot two ports that may be residing in two different instances of management portals. So you do a search and you select a port from port 1 from SANNAV Management Portal Instance 1 and port 2 from SANNAV Management Portal Instance 2. And you take these two ports and you look at the troubleshoot you want to see the FC characteristics, the metrics over the last 3 hours, for example. So in SANNAV Global View, you bring up these two ports and we will show you in one view the metrics for these two ports, even though they reside in two different management portal instances. It was actually a requirement that we got from one of the Russian customers, a large bank. And this was one particular use case that this customer had, and it's a very valid use case. And this is now available with Global View. SANNAV Management Portal, as I explained, is a new version of BNA, revisited, redesigned, rethought. So again, we provide you an instantaneous view of your health. We provide you ways to monitor with the many health dashboards and all sorts of items like that. We provide you tools to troubleshoot when you really need to. And we have a very powerful way for you to understand your SAN connectivity, understand how your hosts are connected through your storage, passing through the fabric. And for that, we have a brand new concept of a context-based topology, which allows you to come to topology from various areas. For example, from your health, you want to understand how things are connected. Or if you want to come to topology as an exploratory type of use case, you can also explore your SAN. For example, if you have new people in your team that want to understand how your hosts are connected, they can browse the topology as well. But it's a very, very different approach than BNA and much more powerful experience that you get with SANNAV Management Portal. And by the way, all that at scale, meaning whether you have 15,000 ports or whether you have 100 ports, your experience as a user will be exactly the same. You will not notice a difference or a system spinning because you have 15,000 ports. So with that, I've introduced at a very high level the two products. Let me talk to you about the architecture briefly so that you understand why is it very different than BNA. So it's a layered distributed software architecture. Starting from the bottom of the stack, it's a microservice-based architecture. So this is a brand new modern architecture. This is typically how things are deployed these days, by having microservices, which is basically a set of Docker containers. So we have hundreds of Docker containers and like about tens or so of services that are running in SANNAV. And so we use Docker containers for various reasons. We use the free version. We also use an orchestrator in case we need to go to the cloud, and that orchestrator is Docker Swarm. But for now, we are, as I mentioned, it's there in the code, but it's not being used. But this microservice architecture is very powerful and it's very flexible. It allows us to package containers inside our services any way we want. And so we have full control of that. And moving up the stack, so on top of this key Docker infrastructure, we have three main components. One is, I'm going to talk with Apache Ignite, the thing in the middle. It's an in-memory database. So it's everything that you can expect out of a database. So it has ACID transactions. It has things language to query. But the only difference is that it doesn't get the data from a persistent store. It's all in RAM, in memory, as a cache. And so that is two points about this. One is this is what guarantees us the performance at scale. This is why we are able to provide to you a very seamless, fast user experience from the user interface. It's because all of this is cached. And number two, it's also the reason why in our deployment of SANNAV, we require a minimum of 48 GB. Because simply bringing up SANNAV with 0 ports managed will require close to 40 GB or so, 30 something. So because of all of these stacks and because we need to reserve a lot of space for this in-memory database. So it's like a good reason, but also it's the reason why you need to have that beefy VM. On the left of Apache Ignite, you see the sign with a ring that's called Kafka, Apache Kafka. So that's a product that's been developed by LinkedIn and Twitter, and then later on put in the open source. And it's a producer-consumer type of model that decouples consumers and producers. It's great for notifications. It's great for streaming. And SANNAV uses it internally. And I want to point out that with FOS 821B and higher, FOS is actually also a producer of streams that SANNAV consumes. So Kafka is not just something that we've introduced in SANNAV, it's also something that we have introduced in FOS as well. And it provides new capability. However, in order for our customers to enjoy all these capabilities, we require that our customers upgrade to FOS version 821B or higher, because that version supports full Kafka streaming, and SANNAV is able to take advantage of that. The third item on the right is Elasticsearch. That's part of an open source package called ELK. You may have heard of it as Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. There's 3 packages. We only use the E part of ELK, and that's called Elasticsearch. It's used for providing searches in SANNAV. It's a very efficient tool, third-party tool, open source tool that is available that can receive any ASCII stream or binary stream like SNMP, syslog, raslog, anything, and then converts it into a standard JSON in a persistent store with an ability to have very powerful query language on top of these JSON converted streams. And that's what's used in SANNAV, very powerful. And moving up the stack on the client side, we are providing user experience using using HTML5 mainly. There is no Java at all, and JavaScript. And we also use third-party tools for our charting and things like that. And so we also have a team of UX designer that makes sure that the look and feel of SANNAV Global View, SANNAV Management Portal, and Web Tool is exactly the same. The workflows are the same. As a user, you won't get confused between Global View or Management Portal or Web Tools. You learn one and you learn all 3 of them. So very, very good approach and very, very intuitive approach to the user interface. So SANNAV Management Portal, I'm going to explain to you some of the dashboards. So the one on the left is viewing the overall health. So, I'm not going to give you, I think it's pretty intuitive. It already tells you what is the health score of your main entities, which is basically starting from the left, the fabric, then the switches, then the hosts, then the storage. And there are scores and there are actions that you can take when the scores is not 100%, right? You can go and view things in topology and do all sorts of actions. We provide you actionable insight based on the health of the entities. We can provide you like BNA, many dashboards, many dashboards and widgets that you can construct out of the box however you want. Moving to the right, you see also the dashboard that I've alluded to in the beginning of my talk, which is called the network port traffic conditions. So this is an out-of-the-box dashboard that is provided with our 2.1 release, and it's very powerful. It allows you to, if you are interested in managing, not so much in the health, but if you're interested more in the traffic side of things, you want to understand your congestion. You want to understand your oversubscription. You want to understand which ports are quarantined if you have enabled maps quarantine actions. This dashboard will give you an instantaneous view that's updated every minute of all of your oversubscription and your congestion. we rank the congestion according to our Brocade standard of mild, moderate, and severe. And you can see straight transition time series in the dashboard. And you know, this particular dashboard is very powerful because we allow you also from there to, we rank the ports in order of most congested to least congested in the table. And then from there, you can view the connectivity in topology, for example, to understand how this E port or F port is connected to the rest of the network. You can also investigate, that means understand the historical metrics for this particular port in time. You could do all sorts of things. And it allows you to immediately, without guessing, understand what is the host that's creating you the problem. What is the host that's congested? What is the host that's oversubscribed? Very easily, without having you to do anything. And then at the bottom, this is what we call our inventory view. So it's also very different than BNA, but it's powerful in the sense that we provide you all of the entities, your switches, your virtual machines, your ports, your hosts, everything in one place, and you can search for things in there and do very, very powerful things. So another thing that I wanted to talk to you in SAN Nav is what I talked about in topology. I alluded to it. One of the use cases that I'm describing here is, you can see on the left, this represents a ring from the health summary dashboard, which tells you that you have hosts in degraded state. If you click on the yellow ring, then it will give you a list of hosts, and you can pick the host here, which is ESXi 87 underscore APP, which I picked. And I said, I want to see that host in context in topology. And as you can see, this host is going through two different fabric A and fabric B, and it's zoned to ports on the all-flash array. So with one click, first of all, we tell you which host has a problem, and we take many factors into consideration. I'm not going to talk about this today, but we have many factors that we take into consideration. Then with one click, you see immediately how this host is connected in the network. You can see that it's multipath, and from there you can do further troubleshooting to really understand what's happening on the host side. And if you try to do this with VNA, it would take you a very long time to get to a view like this, if not impossible. So I mentioned investigation mode. So what is this investigation mode? So investigation mode is nothing but taking an object such as a port or a flow or a virtual machine or anything and saying that you want to troubleshoot it, meaning that you want to see the performance statistics of this object in time, in the past, or in real time in the future, starting from now and then updated every 10 seconds. So with this seamless approach, you know, you can see on this graph, this time series graph, you know, we have many items that you can investigate to really understand what's going on. And in addition, you can see those green bars, which are violations, maps violations that we plot. So not only do we actually plot the traffic metrics that you have requested, but you have also the options or understanding at what time did the violations occur. And we classify the violations into 3 types of violations that you can see in the screen: the congestion, the subscription, and the health. And so you can see these violations as you are investigating. So a very powerful concept as well. In terms of configuration management, so in BNA, for those of you that are familiar with BNA, there was a compass feature. So this is completely redesigned in SAN Nav, but it's the same idea. The idea being that you want to have one particular switch model as your master, your golden configuration, and you want to take this configuration and replicate it across multiple switches. So we allow you to do that with our configuration policy management, which is very powerful even today. And we have plans to make it even more powerful in our upcoming release. And then for zoning, the last bullet there, we have all zonings that are required. And again, we are making many more additions in our release SANNAV 2.2 on the zoning side. SANNAV management also manages flows. So a flow is a conversation between a host port and a target port, and eventually either a LUN or a namespace ID in the case of NVMe. And so in SANNAV, you know, FOSS does actually manage natively Gen 6 flows in version 9.0. And SANNAV 2.10, that's the last bullet that I'm talking about here. SANNAV 2.10 is able to inventory and investigate these flows. So you can see the two pictures. The one on the top represents the flow inventory. And you can see here that I am looking at a Gen 6 SCSI flow that's automatically learned from FOSS. So this is very different than BNA. In BNA, it was called Flow Vision. And this was for Gen 6, but you had to actually create these flows. In FOSS 9.0 and SANNAV 2.1, those Gen 6 flows are auto-learned by FOSS and then streamed through a Kafka streaming to SANNAV. And then you can investigate these flows. And so the investigation is very powerful. We also take the maps policies in there. And so with this solution, it's the beginning of us providing you very good information of how your hosts are talking to your LUNs and to your namespace IDs. And later on, we will provide you tools to group these flows together to represent applications. We already do that with the concept of collections, but I'm not going to talk about this today, but it's something that we have that allows you to monitor your applications. In terms of reporting, SANNAV, unlike BNA, has a plethora of reports. The way that you create a report is similar to the way that you create a widget, because at the end of the day, a report is nothing but a collection of widgets, but organized into a table. And you can use the same method. You can schedule the report. You can have multiple schedule per report. You can select a network scope and then a time scope, and even select filters to create any reports that you want. If our customers have a need for new report, we can always add more widgets as we go in time. But I believe that the existing reports that we have are powerful enough. But if we need to make them more powerful, we can always do that. This is to give you a very high level. I've already talked a lot about some of the items, but I wanted to give you an overview of the added features that we have in SANNAV 2.1. So starting from the left, I'm not going to explain all of this. I talked about many things. So we did many enhancements. You see, for example, automatic storage mapping. I'm not going to talk about that a lot of details today. But it's something that allows us to create storage enclosures based on how the ports registers in the name server automatically. That wasn't existing in BNA. This is something new we're adding in SANNAV, and we're continuing to add more heuristics to manage these storage ports to storage enclosures more effectively. New FOSS 9.0 Web tool launch with single sign-on. I've already talked about that when I described to you the use case where I'm sitting at home, looking at global view, going down to management portal and going down to web tools. That's what I'm talking about here. And then CLI scripting, you have the ability to send CLI commands directly from SANNAV. This is not meant for interactive commands or interactive scripts. That will fail. This is only for simple scripts just to read or set something without any user confirmation or things like that. I'm not going to go through the entire bullets of every single box here. I just am pointing some of the relevant features. You can see that in the automation part, we have something called northbound streaming. This is a very important use case that we're addressing here. For our customers that are interested in receiving the performance statistics for FC ports or Ethernet ports or flows through streaming and keep them for 3 years, 5 years for compliance, audit reasons or whatnot, we can actually send all this data northbound through a Kafka stream, very much like how FOSS streams to SANNav. From SANNav, we can stream to your application, and your application can be either Splunk, can be either something you've written. It could be a simple database. Without writing any code, you can take advantage of this feature. It's very simple. We also have videos how to use this thing in a very simple way, and an example code to bootstrap you. So this is a very powerful feature that you may want to use if you are interested in these types of use cases. That's for 2.1.0. I'm trying to stick on time here. So I'm going to move on to 2.1.1, give you a very brief overview of 2.1.1. So as I explained, our 2.1.1 release is going to be GA in exactly 10 days from today. It will be aligned with FOSS 9.0.1. And the drivers is to add some enhancements on the infrastructure and security that have been requested by many customers. We have performed some feature enhancements, and we have addressed some usability issue. We always do that because we want to keep SANNav very, very professional looking, making sure that we address most important tasks, tasks that customers do daily, multiple times a day. Those are the workflows that we want to optimize and make sure that the number of clicks are minimized, the right information is present at the right time, etc. And then some defect fixes and some RFE. So to give you a brief idea, we have an infrastructure on security. We have the previously in SANNav 2.1, we used a Docker default architecture, which dictated that IP forwarding was turned on the Linux server where SANNav was installed. However, this has security issues. And so with SANNav 2.1.1, all installations of SANNav will not look at IP forwarding, and we recommend that you actually turn it off in your environment. We are also going to support LDAP Global Catalog. This is for customers that have multiple LDAP servers, for 14 of them, for example. So instead of adding all 14 servers to do user authentication, they only enter one global catalog. And then some HTTPS registration for the SANNav northbound schema registration. That's a very minor thing. And then we are supporting a new FOSS rules in maps. And in terms of infrastructure, we are supporting Red Hat Linux and CentOS 8.2. And the OVA will also be packaged with CentOS 8.2. And of course, we support migration from 2.0, 2.1.0, and to 2.1.1. In terms of features, the most important feature that we've added is the first bullet. So in 2.1.1, if you remember, I explained to you before that in SANNav 2.1.0, we supported Gen 6 flows, and in SANNav 2.1.1 and FOSS 9.0.1, we are adding support natively for Gen 7 flows. So that means that now you are able to manage an ITL or ITN, which is directly on a Gen 7 FOSS platform. We made improvements on the inventory, on the fabric discovery, on the switch support save. There's a new through dump on FOSS 9.0.1 that has been introduced, so we're handling it. We made incremental zoning enhancements and events enhancements. I'm not going to go through details. It's just to tell you that basically in 2.1.1, we made feature enhancements in many areas. We've also made many usability enhancements, and these may not mean much to you if you are not familiar with the product. So I'm not going to go in details into that. But it's just, these are basically mainly user interface enhancements that will allow you to use the system in a much better way. So you can see sorting, you can see column setting, you can see consistency, You know, all of these things are important when you use the system daily. And so we put the accent on usability in every single release. And now this is almost my final slide. I'm going to give you a very brief idea of SANNAV 2.2. So again, this is something that we are looking towards, you know, I would say third quarter of 2021, mid-year, but maybe more towards the fall. It will be part of what we call the GIN program, and it will be aligned with FOSS 9.1. So this release is going to be, in my opinion, a fairly significant release for SANNAV, because we have plans to add many enhancements on usability, on workflows, on addressing most common use cases in all areas of SANNAV. You can see here inventory, topology, dashboards, reports, monitoring, the troubleshooting and investigations, configurations and zoning. And in terms of flow management and Gen 7 telemetry data visualizations, we have plans to make that even more consumable with what we had in FIP, Fabric Insight Portal, and with BNA. We have plans to make the flow management even more consumable going forward in the future. So this is the end of my talk. So I think I'm right on time. So Nikolai, I turn it back to you at this point, or you want to ask questions? I'm not sure.
Salim, we have one question.
Yes.
And you probably other version of SANNAV.
Yes. So CentOS yesterday announced that they are going to stop this. So this is fresh right off the press. I've learned about this yesterday. So I'm discussing with engineering. We're going to figure out a solution. Probably we'll be using Oracle Linux, the free version. So this is in the works. It's not a question I can answer at this time. It just happened yesterday. So we are looking into it, and we're going to find a solution for OVA. So we don't have the solution yet. We're looking into it. Engineering is looking into this, but we will have a solution.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Salim.
Sure.
So as there are no other questions, so now we're moving to hot taxes. Dale, your stage.
Okay, thank you very much. I will get started here. So this is my first time presenting to the SAN Club. So there was a suggestion that maybe I should have a little bit of an introduction. I work for the Emulex division of Broadcom, and my home is in Texas, is where I am based. Texas is also the home of cowboys, so you may be familiar with history. A lot of cowboys came from Texas, but not me. I am not a cowboy from Texas. The thing that we do talk about in Texas is that everything is bigger in Texas. So we're going to talk about some big products that we have from Emulex, and hopefully this is a very valuable presentation for you. Just a little history. I joined Emulex about 5 years ago. I spent about 13 years at Dell in engineering management at Dell prior to joining Emulex. And when I joined Emulex, it was pre-acquisition. We were a medium-sized company, and we were focused on many things, including Ethernet adapters, network systems management, baseboard management controllers, and we also did fiber channel. After Emulex was acquired by Broadcom, we have now focused all of our efforts exclusively on fiber channel HBAs. So Emulex only makes fiber channel HBAs. That's the only product that we have, and that's the only thing that we focus on. The advantage of being part of Broadcom is that we do also have sister divisions, Brocade being a very key division for us that handles the networking. And we also have a sister division that does the optics. So it is a very good solution and fit inside of Broadcom. This is just a quick view of some of the product lines that we have at Broadcom. And then specifically, this is where Emulex is inside of the Broadcom portfolio. From the standpoint of our products, as I mentioned, we are exclusively focused on fiber channel HBAs. And if you are looking to deploy a new system, these two HBAs here, would be the two that you would want to choose. If you're deploying a 32 gig deployment, our recommendation would be that you use the 3500 HBAs. This is our Gen 7 HBA. It will actually support PCIe Gen 4 if you have one of those systems. And I just want to point out from a performance standpoint, it's the highest performing HBA on the market with over 5 million IOPS, 10 microsecond response times, and silicon root of trust. This is the gold standard for the industry on Emulex on HBAs, fiber channel HBAs. You'll also note that we have this column here for managed HBAs, and I will be speaking to that as I show you our new application. But the summary is that managed HBAs not only participate in the fabric, but they can actually respond and react to information across the fabric. If you are deploying a 16 gig environment, you could consider the Lancer G6, the 32,000. It's also a very high performing HBA and would work very well in your environment. This is just a graph just to show that how our focus on fiber channel HBAs has changed the market. So after we were acquired by Broadcom and we focused exclusively on fiber channel HBAs, you can see that our market share has changed dramatically. And the question could be, why? Why are customers choosing Emulex over our competition? And we have three reasons why we see customers doing that. Number one, it's Broadcom's broad product line. So now you can buy fiber channel HBAs, fiber channel switches, Ethernet NICs. Broadcom has a full complement of hardware. And so you have one very good support and sales force that you can work with and get fantastic products. There's also, from an Emulex standpoint, it's about innovation and performance. So our HBAs are the top in the market, the best fiber channel HBAs that you can buy. And as you look into next year, as you start planning your purchases and rollouts for your environment, especially if you are starting to use all-flash arrays, we highly recommend that you move to 32 gig fiber channel. And this slide just shows you that next year it's predicted that the sales of 32 gig fiber channel HBAs will be the majority of the HBAs that are being sold on the market. And here we're just showing you that the performance that is gained by moving to 32 gig fiber channel HBAs and all flash arrays is scalable. So whether you are running a database or managing VMs, or doing storage migration, any one of those applications scale very nicely as you move from 8 to 16 to 32. So you will gain significant improvement as you scale up your network speed and get a commensurate performance change. And then just one slide to talk about Emulex performance versus our competition. Once again, this information is available to you from a third-party test lab who purchased HBAs from us and from our competition and ran some tests. And you can see that from an IOPS perspective, we were almost 5 times faster than our competition. From a latency perspective, we're almost half of our competition. But really, the question comes back to, do I get better performance on my application? So it's great to be faster. It's great to have the horsepower. It's great to be able to outperform the competition in benchmarks. But the real answer is, does it impact my application performance? And the answer is yes. You can see that both for Microsoft SQL and for Oracle, you will get significant performance increases by using Emulex HBAs. Now, to speak about lower operational costs, this is really the main part of my demonstration today. I want to show you a new application that Emulex has recently released. This application is a no-cost application, so it's not something that Emulex is selling. It is available to all of our customers who would like to use it. The unique features of this application are that it is in-band on fiber channel. So you no longer need to connect to each server to look at your HBA. Rather, you will sign in to the management port on one Brocade switch. And then once you have signed on to a Brocade switch, you will have access to all of the HBAs on your fiber channel SAN, and all of the communication will go across fiber channel. There are no special agents required for each server, so you do not have to install additional software on your server. It will run with the latest drivers and firmware that are part of our HBA. And it also does not require dedicated hardware. This is an application that you can run inside of a VMware VM. You could even run it inside of a VirtualBox VM on your notebook. And it is an application that you would start up if you need to look at specific information on your network. And then when you are finished, you can turn it off. And always just turn it back on when you want to see that information. The 3 features that I will demonstrate today, I will show you in the application, are the fabric-wide visibility, your visibility of your inventory. I will show you our capabilities for identifying transceiver issues on your SAN, hosts. And I will demonstrate the ability to manage network congestion. Looking at the SAN today, we recognize that everyone has a very good set of tools for managing their HBAs on their servers. And Brocade provides a great set of tools for managing the SAN. But Emulex SAN Manager helps bridge that gap between the server and the SAN. And it gives you the capability to look at all of your hosts in your environment with a single pane of glass, a single screen. So Emulex SAN Manager does not manage the SAN, but it allows you to manage Emulex HBAs through the SAN. And these are the three features that I will demonstrate to you. I will just highlight that Brocade FOSS 9.0 is a requirement. Brocade FOSS 9.0 has new features that allow us to obtain information and communicate with our HBAs. So that's one critical requirement. For the inventory feature, all FDMI capable HBAs will respond. So there is no special requirement for inventory. But for transceiver and congestion management, you will need a managed HBA. You will need an Emulex Gen 6 or Gen 7 HBA. So I'm going to explain how congestion management works, and then I'm going to demonstrate it for you live in my application. For a normal SAN, you will set that up. The SAN has a balanced I/O. All of the storage is correctly sized. All of the servers are running well. But over time, workloads change. Maybe a database gets much bigger than the hardware. Maybe you have added new virtual machines to a virtualization server, and you now have more workload than the server can handle. When that happens, the server starts running out of resources. Those resources could be CPU, PCIe bandwidth, memory. But the issue with this situation is that the server behaves without any ill effects. So the server is still operating well. However, the other workloads on the SAN see that impact. What's new with Brocade FOSS 9.0 is that they can now detect that congestion. So that congestion is detected by the Brocade switch, and the new feature called FPINs now sends that notification to the specific port. So this is a fabric performance impact notification. So this is a notification to the server, and specifically this is a congestion notification. So now the server port is aware that it is creating congestion. And with Emulex SAN Manager, you can now look at that congestion and decide what you would like to do. You could just leave it and monitor it, or you could decide that you want to manage the I/O. And if you decide that you want to manage the I/O, the Emulex HBA will limit the I/O coming in and out of the server to match the hardware resources of the server. So you will see the I/O decrease on this server to eliminate congestion on the SAN. And the positive effect is that all of your workloads will now go back to their normal state. So at this point, I'm going to switch over to the application, and I'm going to show you these features. So I am now logging in to a Fabric A and a Fabric B on the Emulex network. So these are IP addresses for the management port on 2 different fabrics. And so we're going to log in. And the first thing that I'm going to do is demonstrate congestion management. So to do that, I am going to look at just 2 ports on the SAN where I know that there is some congestion. So if we look at this dashboard, when we come into congestion management, we have 3 boxes on the top. One is showing the HBA and how the HBA is detecting congestion. So I can see that I have one HBA that is detecting some congestion on the SAN. But the best place to detect congestion is with the switch on the fabric. And so we can also see here in the center that the fabric is indicating that one of our HBAs is creating congestion. And then over here, I can see the mode that I am in on each HBA port. So right now, all of our ports are just monitoring traffic. They are not taking any action. So if I look at this port here, I can see that this port is creating congestion. And if I look at the history on that port, I can see that if I just look at bandwidth, I can see that the bandwidth has been variable in the past, but as we started this demo, the bandwidth has stabilized at a very high rate, at about 1,500 megabytes per second. And I can see that the fabric has indicated that there is continual congestion on this port. And the HBA is also showing that we have congestion on this port. So I am going to, on this port, change my congestion settings to start actively managing congestion. So I am now sending a message across the SAN to that port, and I am asking that port to start actively managing the I/O out of that port. And just as a contrast, we'll take a look at this other port on the SAN. For this port, we can see that there is no HBA congestion in any recent time frame. There's no fabric congestion. But the traffic pattern has changed as well. This traffic pattern is now running at about 600 megabytes per second. So there has been some change on the fabric, but this port appears to be well behaved. So we will return to this in a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, I'm going to show you some other features of this application. So the primary use case for inventory, we're now looking at the inventory tab here, is to look at your environment and to be able to see whether everything is up to the latest version. So if you can see here, I am looking at about 440 ports on this fabric, or on these two fabrics, the AB fabric. So the use case here would be that you may want to look at, for example, your VMware machines. So I just started typing VMware, and it's sorted it down to just the VMware instances, which is about 70 instances. And then the use case for this would be that I would want to look at my firmware and driver versions. So I want to look at my firmware and my driver versions to make sure that they are at the correct level. And if I just want to do a basic compare, I'm just making sure that each device has the same level of firmware and driver, that this is 12.6, this should also be 12.6. And what I see now is that from these 67 ports, I have 8 that do not have matching firmware and drivers. And so I can now take this list and I can export it. I can export it to a CSV, Excel file, or a JSON file. And if I do that, just to show you, I now have a list of these ports that I can give to my server administrator and ask them to update these versions during their next maintenance window. Their next opportunity, they should work on that. And just to show you, this export is available in any screen, so I can use it here as well. If I wanted to export all of my VMware instances, I could do that right now. And as you can see here, I now have a list of all of the VMware machines that I have on my network. So this inventory screen is very useful. I will clear the filters here. It's very useful to look at all the systems on your network. As I mentioned before, whether you have managed or unmanaged hosts, they will all show up in inventory. So for example, you can even see competitive HBAs on the network. So the inventory screen is complete. It will show you all of the HBAs on the network that are responding to FDMI commands. One other feature of the application for SAN managers, if you have a new Brocade Gen 7 switch and you would like to replace that switch in your environment. So let's say, for example, I want to replace my O2 switch. I want to upgrade it to my newest switch in my environment. This feature helps me identify any ports on that switch that do not have a path into the Fabric A and Fabric B. So on this switch, I have 3 ports, 3 hosts that only have one path into the fabric. So before I take the switch offline for maintenance, I probably need to go look at each of these hosts and make sure they have an alternate path into Fabric B before I take it offline. Of course, once again, I can just create that list and then go make sure those hosts have an alternate path into the fabric before I take that switch offline. So this was a feature that was requested by our SAN administrators as we talked to many customers, and they find that feature very useful. Now I am looking at transceiver data. Transceiver data requires a managed HBA. It requires a Gen 6 or a Gen 7 HBA. So you can see now that I have less systems. I'm now looking at 100 systems. So these are the only systems that have managed HBAs in it. But you can see that I'm collecting information from the host ports for voltage, power levels, current draw, temperature, And what I have here is a health indicator. So I can immediately see and sort if there's any transceiver on my network that's starting to show some concerning signs. And I can see here that I have one host that has 3 ports, and all 3 of those ports indicate that there's something there. And if I just hover over that, I can see that there's been a temperature change and a TX power change on that port. Matter of fact, I can go look at the diag history on that, and I can see that over the last 24 hours, this port has changed temperature from 38C up to 56. So there's something wrong here. In this case, it is probably not a failing SFP. This case is probably an indication that somebody opened up the system, took the cover off, and so it doesn't have enough airflow, and therefore the temperature has gone up. So in that case, I can select this port and say, I think everything's okay. And once the system is back down to the proper temperature, I could reset this specific port. But the real value of this here is that I can get transceiver data from all of my hosts, and I can immediately see if any of those have issues that I should investigate. Now, going back to where we started, the congestion management. Once again, we'll just go look at the 2 ports that we saw before. If you remember, this port here was showing congestion, and we turned on congestion management on this port. And what you can see right here, you can see where I turned on congestion management, and the I/O on that port has been reduced. So we've been reduced from 1,500 megabytes per second down to about 1,200. And you can also see that it is going up and down. This is a demonstration of our adaptive algorithm. So when we turn on congestion management on that port, we are telling the HBA to manage the I/O out of that port, to restrict the I/O, to eliminate any congestion. But then over time, we allow that I/O to start to drift back up. And if it's not creating congestion on the SAN, it can drift all the way back up to the original level. But in this case, I can show you here, it is creating congestion on the SAN. So you can see that the congestion went down until there was no congestion on the SAN. The I/O went down. Then the I/O started to come back up, and the SAN informed it that it was creating congestion. So the I/O then leveled off, and now you can see it's starting to climb again. So that's our adaptive algorithm. It manages the I/O on the server to keep it from creating congestion on the SAN. Now, if you remember, this port here was running at about 600 megabytes per second. And what you see is as soon as we turned on congestion management on the other port, this one now has returned to normal behavior. So this application was being impacted by the congestion on the other port. Now, you would ask, if this port is now running at a very high rate, is it now creating congestion on the SAN? And the answer is no. There is no congestion being created by this port. But you can see that our bandwidth has gone from 600, 650 up to 1300. So our bandwidth has doubled. I can also show you that our latency has been roughly cut in half from 12 milliseconds to 6 milliseconds. So our bandwidth has doubled. Our latency is cut in half. This port, which had no congestion at any time, was being impacted by the other port on the fabric. Now, if I go back to this port and look at the history on this one, there is an interesting phenomena that you'll see here. First, as you can see, it is continually trying to run at a higher speed, but the fabric is telling it that it's creating congestion, and so it's staying at this level here. And that's, that's intentional. We are intentionally creating congestion on the SAN, so this will never clear. But in your environment, if that congestion was transient, that congestion just was for a small period of time, then this port could drift back up, all the way back up to full speed. Now, what is very interesting for this port is that if you look at the latency, when we had congestion on the SAN, the latency on this port was about 5 milliseconds. So it was a very high latency during the time of congestion. And now that we've cleared the congestion, the latency is down around 500. So we have had a 10 times improvement in latency across, that's traffic from the port to the target and then returning back to the port. So this shows that we have, by changing the bandwidth, we have dramatically improved the traffic running across the SAN. We have dramatically reduced the congestion and made the SAN run much more efficiently. Now, this still has a problem. This system still has a problem. It is running a workload that's larger than the hardware that it's on. So you will want to, during your next opportunity, either move some of that workload off the server or resize the server to be able to handle the workload. But what this adaptive congestion management allows you to do is to take immediate action on the SAN to minimize congestion and then plan for the next opportunity when you could resize that workload or resize the hardware and solve the problem for good. So from an Emulex standpoint, we believe that once our customers are comfortable with this congestion management protocol, that for a tier 2 or tier 3 workload, for a workload that is not important to your business, that you would just turn on congestion management and leave it on. It would always be on, and it would only impact your workload if your workload was creating congestion. So it would just be a protection to ensure that your workload would never create congestion on the SAN. For a tier 1 workload, for your most important application in your data center, you may also want to turn it on. that would be your choice. But the reason that you would want to turn it on is because even, for example, with this workload, even if it is your most important workload, you probably do not want to be creating congestion across your SAN. So once again, the value is that by turning on congestion management, you can minimize the congestion created by the SAN, and the actual knowledge that you are actively managing I/O gives you insight and gives you the capability to know that you have a workload you need to resize, and gives you time to go do that and make plans for that. This will manage it during that time until you can have a maintenance window and change the settings or resize the workload. So that's a full overview of Emulex SAN Manager. The version that I am showing today is version 1.2. We have not released 1.2 yet. That will be coming out shortly after the first of the year. So if you are starting to transition to FOSS 9.0, then this would be a good time to start looking at also installing Emulex SAN Manager. So 1.1 is available today. It supports a single fabric. 1.2 that I have just demonstrated for you supports a dual fabric, a fabric A and a fabric B. So we encourage you to look at our HBAs, deploy them in your environment, and as you move to FOSS 9, request a copy, a free copy of Emulex SAN Manager, and add that to your environment as well. So, I see a question that says, the firmware driver mismatch page also runs for OEM drivers. The answer is yes. It works for all versions. Matter of fact, what I didn't show, I'll just pick Windows this time. So now I have 30 machines. And there are no mismatches here. So with the Windows machines, they are all correctly configured today. But what I didn't show you is there are actually advanced features with firmware driver mismatch. So if you have for example, if you want to look and say for my HP Emulex HP adapters, I want version X and version Y. And for my Dell adapters, I have different versions. You can set up an advanced configuration to separately look at those versions to make sure that each OEM version is a different standard. So there's many different ways to configure this. I just showed the simplest way. Okay, Nikolay, that wraps it up for my presentation.
Thank you, Dale. I have a question to you and to Salim.
I have to put on my cowboy hat to answer questions.
Yeah. So, and I will just put mine. Yeah. Bavarian hat was too big, so I'll put a small one from Kazakhstan. Yeah. So how Emulex SAN Manager may be integrated with SAN Nav? So yes, that's a very good question. So we are
we're still working with the Brocade team on how we can integrate. But Marcus does have a video on YouTube that shows how you can detect congestion in SAN Nav, and then how you would jump to ESM and take a look at that. So today they're separate applications, but they're you know, our discussions, for example, you know, thoughts of how we could make those maybe a link and launch or some type of application like that in the future. But really our goal with the 1.x version of ESM was just to make sure that it was very valuable to our customers. And then that helps with making decisions of how we integrate it in the future.
Okay, thank you, Dale. So Marcus, would you be able, please, to add this link, maybe either to your presentation somewhere in the end, or send it to Dale to be added to his presentation so that we can share it with the speakers, with the listeners?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Actually, the link that I provided yesterday to the Brocade YouTube channel, the demonstration is there, and it's called Congestion Management with FPIN, but I will find the exact link and add it.
Okay, thank you. And Salim, do you have anything to add to this integration of SAN Nav and MLX SAN Manager?
No, I don't have anything else to add. I think it's definitely technically feasible. I think it's just a matter of you know, deciding when to do it in the roadmap. We could envisage ways to launch the MLX SAN Manager from SAN Nav, from the network port traffic condition dashboards. That seems to be a logical place. It's definitely technically possible. There's no roadblock. It's just a matter of when to put it in the roadmap. And as Dale explained, you know, it's something that we can look at in the future, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Salim. Dale, another question. I think just that is continuation of previous question. So if SAN Manager shows the best version of the software to be installed, you're on mute, Dale.
Yeah, it does work better to unmute. Yes, today what we know is that most of our customers have their own standards, so that is what we have made available, that they can define their own standards. But we are investigating the possibility of integrating, perhaps like Dell, HP, Lenovo, you know, to give you the suggestion for their specific HVAs what version you should be running. Not a feature we have today, but it's certainly something we're thinking about.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Yeah, we have one more question. Did multipath exceptions feature also checks traffic to investigate multipath software issues, like some hosts connected to 2 fabrics, but data
Correct.
only flows from one?
So the answer is no, not in the current version. So this is simply a physical check. It is just letting you know whether there is a physical connection to fabric A and fabric B. But we are looking at, in the future, being able to check traffic. We're not today looking at traffic between those two ports. So there is a possibility to do that in the future, but today it's just a very simple physical check to confirm that you have a physical path between the two fabrics. And that was the request that we had. The SAN administrator said, it's not my job to confirm that the software is configured correctly, but it is my job to confirm that I have a physical path between the two fabrics.
Okay, thank you, Dale. So any one more question? Thank you. So please send questions. Yeah, so it's in Russian, I'll translate. So the question is about SAN-NAV. Did anybody see that all the figures of health at the start dashboard were 100% and everything was green? And where SAN-NAV takes information to build the graphical topology, server and its ports, switch and storage.
So I think, let me try to understand the question here. The question is, has anybody been able to see a completely green dashboard with 100% scores?
That's the first question, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know. What I do know is that we provide, it's definitely possible from the code perspective, because you can just simply ignore all the factors and you will get 100% score. So I know that's possible, and that we actually provide ways to configure and change each of the health factors. So I did not go into the presentation, but for each fabric, switch, host, and storage, we have a number of factors that add up to 100%. And we give the user privileges and ways to actually change the weight of each factors. And you can even ignore factors. So it's definitely possible to get to 100% all green score. And some customers actually have changed some of these factors already today. So that's the first part. What was the second part?
And the second part, where SAN-NAV takes information about the graphical topology. So when you build the topology picture, so where information comes from about server and its ports, about the switch, and about storage.
Okay, so when you are in the user interface in topology and you request to see, for example, a host in context, so the client makes a call to the server, and the server returns all the information to the client so that the client can draw the topology. That's how it works. So the input to build the topology is a context. And the context is an object that could be either a host, a storage, a zone, a port, a fabric, any of those elements. So when you pass that into the server returns a graph. And that graph is then plotted into the topology. I'm not sure if that's the question, but and I'm not sure I understood the question, but I think that's what I understand. Is that is that satisfactory?
I hope yes. If it is not answered, so please send us another question. So any other questions? Okay. So looks like that's it. Thank you very much, everybody, for participation in our event, both as speakers and listeners. So when you leave this conference, you will be asked several questions. So please give your feedback, and especially valuable feedback for the open question, what we can improve for the future, because that's the first year we do our events online. Oh yeah, we have one more probably question. So as you collect the information from the server, it means that the traffic must be admitted to go from SAN-NAV to server with HBA through some TCP port. Did I translate it so that you understood it somehow?
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay,
the
let
me.
Okay. Second attempt. So, does it mean that we need somehow to allow the traffic to go from SAN-NAV to server HBA? And do you use some TCP port for this?
No. So SANav does not talk directly to the host or the storage devices using an out-of-band protocol. We don't do that. So all we do in SANav is we talk to the fabrics and the switches, right? Mm-hmm. When we talk to the fabric, we ask it for the list of registered devices that have registered in the name server. So the host and the storage. So that's how we get the information about the devices that have registered to the fabric. So we don't actually directly communicate to the host port or the host itself or the storage ports themselves. We have a proxy view of those through the name server in the fabric. We don't actively manage those. If you will. We manage them through the fabric, right? So we don't talk to them in band. We do have plans in the roadmap in the future to do out-of-band management of the hosts and the storage, but currently that is not supported.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I believe so. So any other questions? Okay, so then thank you everybody and see you next year. So hopefully you will be able to come in person. Yeah. So be healthy.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.